You've been misled about love. They told you that if you truly love someone, you will never outgrow them. You will stay the same person beside them forever. You will hold on, no matter how much you change. But if that were true, why do so many hearts still care while quietly drifting apart? Why do you still wish them well, and yet feel that your life is pulling you somewhere they cannot follow? The truth is, you can love someone and still outgrow them. Love does not freeze time. It does not stop the soul from evolving. And Buddhist wisdom has understood this for centuries, that all things are impermanent, even the bonds that once felt unbreakable. The greatest teachers did not teach us how to cling. They taught us how to love with open hands, how to release without hatred, how to walk forward without turning love into a prison. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to settle. The guilt will soften, the confusion will clear. You will feel a quiet acceptance, like waves calming after a storm. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will see your past differently, not as something lost, but as something that shaped you into who you are becoming. This is not just something to fall asleep to. This is a gentle understanding for the part of you learning how to love and let go at the same time. Are you ready? Let's begin. The quiet part of this journey is not the moment you let go. It is the moment you realize something has already changed, and no one said it out loud. Tonight, we move into one of the deepest forms of heartbreak, not losing a person, but losing the version of us that once made life feel certain. Something feels different long before anyone admits it. Conversations that once flowed now feel careful. Laughter sounds familiar but no longer effortless. The connection is still there, but it feels like holding a photograph of a place that no longer exists. This is the grief of outgrowing a shared identity, and it can be more confusing than a sudden ending because nothing dramatic happened. There was no explosion, no betrayal, no clear reason to point to, just a slow, quiet shift that neither of you knew how to stop. At first, the mind searches for explanations. Maybe stress, maybe timing, maybe a phase that will pass if both people try harder. But beneath those thoughts, there is a deeper awareness forming. The life you built together was shaped by who you both were at the time, not who you are becoming now. When growth moves in different directions, the shared story begins to lose its structure. It is like two travelers who started on the same road and slowly drifted toward different paths without realizing when the separation began. One of the hardest parts is that love can still exist while alignment disappears. You may still care deeply about their happiness. You may still feel protective of them. But the sense of being understood without explanation starts to fade. You begin to notice that you are translating your thoughts instead of speaking naturally. You choose your words more carefully. You hold back parts of yourself because sharing them feels complicated instead of safe. This creates a strange loneliness that exists even when the other person is sitting right beside you. It is not physical absence that hurts. It is emotional distance where familiarity used to live. The person who once felt like home now feels like someone you visit politely, unsure how long you should stay. Buddhist teachings often speak about impermanence, not as a cold concept, but as a gentle truth about existence. Everything that arises eventually transforms. Relationships are no exception. They are living processes shaped by countless small moments, decisions, experiences, and inner changes. When two people grow at different speeds or in different directions, the shared identity they relied on begins to dissolve. Not because anyone failed, but because life itself is movement. There is also grief for the future that was imagined together. Plans that once felt certain now feel fragile. Traditions lose their meaning. Places that held memories start to feel heavy instead of comforting. You realize that you are not only mourning what was, but also what will never happen. This kind of grief is rarely acknowledged by others. People understand breakups, arguments, dramatic endings, but they struggle to understand a loss that has no clear event attached to it. It can make you question your own feelings. You may wonder if you are being ungrateful or impatient. You may try to convince yourself that nothing is wrong because everything looks fine from the outside. Yet inside, something keeps whispering that the connection you once relied on is no longer the same. Outgrowing a shared identity often begins with personal change that feels necessary for survival. You start learning things about yourself that you ignored before. You become more aware of your needs, your values, your boundaries. Growth can bring clarity, but it also reveals where compromise has quietly replaced authenticity. Sometimes the bond was built on shared struggles rather than shared peace. Pain can create powerful closeness because it makes two people feel less alone. When healing begins, the dynamic shifts. The conversations that once revolved around surviving now require a new language centered on living. If one person is ready for that transition and the other is not, the connection can start to feel uneven. There is also fear involved. Fear of hurting someone who did nothing wrong. Fear of being seen as the person who changed. Fear of stepping into an unknown life without the familiar support that once existed. It can feel safer to stay in a relationship that no longer fits than to face the uncertainty of growth alone. But remaining in a space that no longer reflects who you are creates its own kind of suffering. You begin to shrink parts of yourself to maintain harmony. You postpone personal dreams to avoid disrupting the balance. Over time, this quiet self-abandonment builds resentment, not toward the other person, but toward the situation itself. Buddhist compassion teaches that true kindness includes honesty. Pretending that nothing has changed may protect feelings in the short term, but it prevents both people from facing reality. Growth requires space, and sometimes that space cannot exist within the old structure of a relationship. The grief intensifies when you remember how genuine the connection once was. The memories are not illusions. The love was real. The laughter was real. The promises were spoken with sincerity. Accepting that something true has reached its natural end can feel like betraying the past, even though it is simply acknowledging the present. You may find yourself revisiting old conversations, trying to locate the exact moment things shifted. But there is rarely a single point where everything changed. It is more like watching daylight fade into evening. You cannot pinpoint the second when afternoon becomes night, only that the light is no longer the same. Outgrowing a shared identity also challenges the belief that lasting love must remain unchanged. Many people are taught that strong relationships mean staying aligned forever, that growing apart is a sign of failure. But from a Buddhist perspective, attachment to permanence is what creates suffering. Love that allows transformation is not weaker. It is more honest. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is to accept that two lives are no longer meant to follow the same rhythm. This does not erase the bond that existed. It honors it by refusing to distort it into something strained or forced. There is also a quiet dignity in acknowledging that someone was meant for a particular chapter of your life, not the entire story. Certain people arrive to teach lessons, to support healing, to help you discover parts of yourself that would have remained hidden otherwise. When their role is complete, holding on to them out of fear prevents both of you from continuing your journeys. This realization does not bring immediate peace. It often brings waves of sadness, relief, guilt, and tenderness all at once. You may miss them even while knowing distance is necessary. You may wish things were different even while understanding why they cannot be. Healing begins when you stop trying to restore the past and start allowing the present to exist as it is. This does not require cutting off care or pretending the relationship never mattered. It means accepting that the form of the connection has changed. You can still wish them happiness. You can still appreciate what was shared. You can still carry the lessons forward. Letting go of the shared identity does not mean letting go of compassion. Over time, the grief softens into something quieter, The memories lose their sharp edges. Instead of focusing on what was lost, you begin to recognize what was gained. Resilience, clarity, a deeper understanding of yourself. You see how the relationship shaped your growth, even if it could not continue alongside it. Eventually, the story of us becomes part of your history, rather than the definition of your present. It no longer controls your decisions or limits your possibilities. It becomes a chapter you can read with gratitude instead of longing, and in that space, something new begins to form. Not a replacement, not a distraction, but a life that reflects who you are now. A life where connection does not require shrinking, where understanding does not feel forced, where presence feels natural again. Outgrowing a shared identity is painful because it marks the end of a familiar world, but it also opens the door to a more authentic one. The grief you feel is not proof that you made the wrong choice. It is proof that the connection mattered. In the quiet, after acceptance, there is a subtle peace that starts to grow. A sense that you can carry love without carrying the weight of a story that no longer fits. A realization that growth did not destroy the bond, it transformed it into something that can exist without holding you back. And as this understanding settles in, the heart slowly learns that loving someone and releasing the identity you built together are not contradictions. They are part of the same compassionate truth, that people change, paths diverge, and life continues moving forward even when the past was beautiful. Tonight, that truth may feel heavy, but within it is also freedom. The freedom to honor what was while allowing yourself to become who you are meant to be next. When the old us finally stops feeling like home, the heart doesn't instantly shut off. It still remembers, it still cares, it still reaches for the familiar, even when the mind knows that the story has changed. And that is where a new kind of test begins, not the grief of losing a shared identity, but the harder question of what love becomes after the identity dissolves. Because even when two paths separate, compassion often remains. The problem is that compassion can quietly turn into a rope that tries to pull someone back into a life they have already outgrown, a rope that says stay even when staying would shrink both people. Tonight we move into one of the most important Buddhist skills in love, learning to care deeply without clinging. Something about this lesson feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges what most people call love. It exposes the hidden bargain that often lives under affection, the quiet expectation that if someone mattered once, they must stay close forever, the belief that caring means holding tighter. But Buddhism teaches something very different. It teaches that real compassion does not trap, it does not demand, it does not beg reality to freeze. There is a softer kind of love that most people never practice. It is love without possession, love without control, love that blesses a person's becoming, even when their becoming no longer includes you. Compassion without clinging begins with a painful realization. The heart can sincerely want the best for someone, yet still feel threatened when their best leads them away. This is where people confuse love with fear. They say, "I just don't want to lose you," but what they often mean is, "I don't want to face the emptiness that comes when you're no longer part of my daily world." Clinging is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like constant checking in, not out of care but out of anxiety. Sometimes it looks like giving advice that is really disguised control. Sometimes it looks like staying overly involved in their choices, their relationships, their direction, because letting them choose freely feels like losing your place in their life. And this is where Buddhism brings clarity. Attachment does not mean affection. Attachment means dependence. It means the mind has tied its stability to a person, a role, or an outcome. Compassion, on the other hand, is simply goodwill. It is the pure wish that someone may be free from suffering and supported in their growth. So the question becomes simple but challenging. Can care remain even when control is released? One way to understand this is to notice what happens in the body when someone you love makes a decision you do not like. If the chest tightens, if the mind starts racing, if you feel a desperate need to change their mind, that is not compassion, that is clinging. Compassion is calm. It may feel sad, but it is not frantic. It does not panic when reality moves. Clinging is often rooted in a hidden belief that your love is responsible for their safety. It's a belief that says, if I stop holding them, they will fall. This can come from genuine concern, but it can also come from unresolved fear. Sometimes fear from earlier losses, sometimes fear from abandonment wounds, sometimes fear from a past where love was unstable, so the mind learned to grip tightly to whatever felt secure. Buddhist practice does not shame this fear, it simply invites you to see it clearly, because the moment you see clinging as fear, not love, you stop romanticizing it. You stop calling anxiety devotion. You stop calling control care. Then a deeper compassion begins to grow. Compassion for them and compassion for yourself. Compassion without clinging means allowing someone's life to belong to them again. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to respect their path. It means recognizing that people are not meant to be held like property. Even if two lives once fit perfectly together, that does not create permanent ownership over each other's future. This is especially difficult when the other person is kind, when they still love you, or when there is no clear reason to separate beyond growth itself. In those situations, clinging often disguises itself as loyalty. You tell yourself you are being faithful to what you built. But Buddhism gently asks, faithful to what? Faithful to the past, or faithful to truth? Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is release someone from the version of you that still needs them to stay the same. Compassion without clinging also means letting go of the urge to rewrite them into someone who fits your life again. Many people try to keep a relationship alive by reshaping the other person. They push them to heal faster, grow differently, be more emotionally available, be more ambitious, be more spiritual, be less emotional, be less distant. The intention seems loving, but underneath it is resistance. Resistance to who that person actually is. From a Buddhist perspective, this is where suffering multiplies, because every time you try to control another human being, you create conflict with reality, and reality always wins. True compassion says, may you be well, not may you become what I need. There is also another layer. Sometimes clinging is fueled by identity. If someone once defined your place in the world, partner, best friend, chosen person, then releasing them feels like releasing yourself. The mind says, if they go, what does that make me? This is why compassion without clinging is also a practice of selfhood. It forces you to meet yourself without leaning on a relationship for meaning. And that is not punishment, that is freedom. In Buddhism, there is a teaching about non-attachment that many people misunderstand. They think it means becoming cold, indifferent, emotionally distant. But that is not non-attachment. That is avoidance. Real non-attachment is warmth without grasping. It is love without chains. It is tenderness without control. It is the difference between holding a bird gently and squeezing it so it cannot fly. Compassion without clinging is learning to open your hands. This practice starts with honesty. Notice what you want from them now, not what you wish for them, but what you want from them. Their attention, their reassurance, their presence, their loyalty, their promise that you still matter. When you see the need clearly, you stop hiding it behind, I'm just checking on you. Then you can meet that need in a healthier way. You can turn toward your own heart and ask, what am I afraid of? And what part of me feels unsafe without this bond? This is where Buddhist mindfulness becomes practical. You sit with the discomfort instead of acting it out. You feel the urge to reach out, and you pause. You feel the urge to demand clarity, and you breathe. You feel the urge to control the outcome, and you soften the body. In that pause, you are rewiring the mind. You are teaching yourself that you can survive change without gripping someone. That pause is where peace is built. Compassion without clinging also involves redefining what it means to do right by someone. Many people believe that if they truly care, they must stay involved, stay close, stay responsible. But sometimes closeness becomes interference. Sometimes involvement becomes pressure. Sometimes constant presence prevents both people from discovering who they are without each other. So compassion may look like stepping back. Stepping back does not mean disappearing with cruelty. It means creating space with dignity. It means letting silence do what words cannot. It means leaving room for their life to unfold naturally without your emotional weight sitting on top of it. A compassionate heart does not punish someone for growing away. It does not create guilt to hold them close. It does not use sadness as a weapon. It does not say, "After everything I did for you, how can you leave?" That kind of sentence is not love. It is a trap dressed as loyalty. Compassion without clinging says, "I understand," even when the heart is breaking. It says, "I want your happiness," even when that happiness is painful to watch from a distance. This is not easy. It is one of the highest forms of love because it demands maturity. It demands that you stop using love as a way to secure yourself. It demands that you stop making another human being the solution to your emptiness. And when you practice this, something changes inside you. You become lighter, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped fighting reality. You begin to realize that clinging is exhausting. It keeps the mind on constant alert. It creates anxiety. It makes you read into every message, every delay, every tone. It turns love into monitoring. Compassion is different. Compassion is spacious. It allows breathing room. It allows people to come and go without hatred. It allows gratitude to remain even when closeness ends. There is also a beautiful truth here. When you stop clinging, you stop distorting the connection. You stop turning love into pressure. You stop making them feel responsible for your emotional stability. And in doing that, you actually honor what was real between you. Sometimes, when people feel clung to, they pull away faster. They feel trapped. They feel watched. They feel guilted. But when they feel respected, something softer happens. Even if they still leave, they leave without hatred. They leave without needing to destroy the past to escape it. That is what compassion creates. A clean ending. A gentle separation. And if the connection continues in a new form, it continues more honestly. Not because you demanded it, but because it naturally fits. Compassion without clinging also teaches you something about timing. Some people are meant to be loved, not held. Some people are meant to be cherished, not kept. Some connections are sacred precisely because they were not permanent. Their beauty was in what they awakened, not in how long they lasted. When you understand this, you stop trying to force love to obey your preferences. You begin to trust life. Buddhism calls this trust in the unfolding. Trust that what belongs will remain and what does not belong will pass. Not as punishment, but as movement. There is still grief in this practice. It is not numbness. You will still feel the ache of missing them. You will still remember the warmth of closeness, but the grief becomes cleaner because it is not tangled with desperation, and clean grief heals faster. One powerful practice is to silently bless them, not with dramatic speeches, but with simple inner wishes. May you be safe, may you be peaceful, may you grow in the direction you need. Doing this does not mean you approve of every choice they make. It means you stop wishing for their pain just to keep them near. This practice purifies the heart. It keeps love from becoming bitterness. It also protects you, because the more you cling, the more you suffer. And not only do you suffer, you prolong suffering. You create mental loops. You create longing that turns into obsession. You create narratives about what they should do. You create resentment when reality refuses to obey. But when you practice compassion without clinging, you free yourself from that loop. You also become someone who can love better in the future, because you are no longer practicing attachment as your default setting. You are practicing respect, and respect is the foundation of real love. Eventually, you learn that the urge to keep someone on your path is not proof of love. It is proof of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting again, fear of losing the familiar, fear of not being chosen. Buddhism does not ask you to deny these fears. It asks you to meet them with awareness, to sit with them, to observe them, to see that they rise, they pass, they do not define you. The heart becomes strong when it stops needing to hold people hostage to feel safe. That is what compassion without clinging gives you. It gives you the ability to care without collapsing, to love without losing yourself, to release without turning cold, to honor without holding. And slowly you realize something profound. You can let someone go and still keep your heart open. You can accept separation without turning it into hatred. You can bless their path without forcing it to intersect with yours. That is a Buddhist kind of love. Not weak, not passive, not detached in a cold way, but awake. And in that awakening, there is a surprising peace. Not because you got what you wanted, but because you stopped fighting what is. Because real compassion does not demand permanence. It simply wishes freedom. When compassion learns to open its hands, something surprising happens. The mind stops arguing with the fact that a person can be loved without being held. The heart begins to breathe again. Yet, even with that new softness, a question still lingers in the quiet. If the connection was real, if the care was genuine, why did it still not work? And this is where many people break themselves. They assume the ending proves the love was weak. They assume separation means someone was wrong for someone else. They assume that if it was meant to be, it would have been easy. But Buddhism offers a different lens. Sometimes it is not about mismatch. Sometimes it is about timing. Sometimes two souls meet and the meeting is meaningful, but the season is not right for staying. There is a strange kind of pain that comes from knowing someone was not a mistake, yet still not a future. The heart says, this mattered, while life says, not like this, not now. Tonight we step into that subtle truth, the karma of meeting at the wrong time. Something about this topic stirs curiosity because it touches a fear most people carry silently. The fear that life can bring something beautiful too early or too late. The fear that love can arrive while you are still becoming someone who can hold it. The fear that two people can be right, yet reality can still say no. Meeting at the wrong time does not mean the connection was false. It means the conditions around it were not ready. In Buddhist teaching, karma is not only about reward and punishment. It is about causes and conditions. It is about how everything in life unfolds because of countless influences coming together in a moment. A seed may be perfect, but if the soil is not ready, it cannot grow into what it was meant to be. Two people can be like that. The bond can be strong, but the environment of their lives may not support it. One person may be healing while the other is still surviving. One may be learning to trust while the other is learning to be independent. One may be ready to build while the other is still learning how to stand alone. The love exists, but the timing does not. This is one of the hardest truths to accept because the mind wants control. It wants a reason. It wants someone to blame. Timing feels unfair because it cannot be argued with. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot fix it with effort alone. You can change behavior. You can communicate. You can work through conflict. But you cannot force a season to become something it is not. Sometimes the timing is wrong because two people meet during transition. One is about to move, change careers, start a new chapter, or undergo a personal awakening. The connection begins in the middle of instability. The heart becomes attached to the feeling of finally finding someone, but life is still shifting under their feet. What begins as comfort can become pressure. Sometimes the timing is wrong because the relationship arrives before one person has faced their own patterns. They may still carry unhealed wounds that shape how they love. They may seek reassurance constantly because they fear abandonment. They may shut down when things become intimate because closeness once meant danger. They may not yet have the emotional skills needed to sustain a healthy bond. In those moments, love is not enough because love is being filtered through pain, and pain can distort the most sincere connection. Other times, the timing is wrong because the relationship arrives when life is demanding full attention elsewhere. Not because love is not important, but because survival takes priority. A person dealing with financial instability, family crises, mental exhaustion, or heavy responsibilities may not have the capacity to nurture love properly. They may care deeply, but still show up inconsistently. They may want to give more, but feel drowned by everything else. This creates a tragedy that looks like incompatibility from the outside, but it is often just capacity. Two people may fit emotionally, but their lives may not have room for each other at that point in time. Buddhism teaches that attachment often forms not only to a person, but to an idea of what should have happened. When the timing is wrong, the mind becomes obsessed with alternate timelines. It says, if only we met later, if only that job didn't happen, if only we were both healed, if only I knew then what I know now. This is where suffering deepens, because the mind tries to live in a world that does not exist. The truth is painful, but freeing. You can only meet someone in the version of life that exists, not the version you wish existed. Karmic timing is also about readiness. Not just practical readiness, but inner readiness. Many people meet someone who shows them what healthy love could be, but they are not yet capable of receiving it without fear. They may push it away, sabotage it, or doubt it. They may feel unworthy and create distance. They may cling too hard and suffocate the bond. They may test the other person endlessly to see if they will leave. When a person is not ready, even kindness can feel suspicious. Even stability can feel boring. Even peace can feel unsafe. That is why timing matters. The same person who could be a perfect partner later might feel impossible now, not because they changed, but because you changed. Sometimes two souls meet simply to awaken something. A new standard, a deeper understanding, a moment of being seen, a reminder that love can be gentle, a mirror that reveals what needs healing. This meeting is karmic not because it must last, but because it must teach. In Buddhism, not every connection is meant to become a permanent structure. Some are meant to be catalysts. They shake you awake. They show you a truth you cannot unsee. They force growth. They reveal what you have been tolerating. They show you what you truly want. Then they pass. This can feel cruel because the heart does not want a lesson, it wants a life. But sometimes life gives you a lesson first, so you can build a better life later. The pain of wrong timing is also the pain of not being able to hold on to something beautiful without damaging it. When two people try to force a relationship in the wrong season, the connection can start to break under pressure. Love becomes conflict. Care becomes resentment. The bond becomes heavy. And then, when it ends, both people wonder why something that felt so right became so exhausting. Sometimes it became exhausting because it was being asked to carry a future it was not built to carry yet. This is why Buddhist wisdom encourages acceptance. Not passive acceptance that gives up on growth, but acceptance of reality's conditions. Acceptance that a seed cannot grow without the right season. There is a deep compassion in recognizing wrong timing. It allows you to stop blaming them. It allows you to stop blaming yourself. It allows you to see that both of you were doing the best you could with the tools you had at that time. It also helps you avoid turning the relationship into a courtroom. When timing is the factor, the mind has less reason to label someone as the villain. It becomes easier to say, "This mattered, but it could not last." That sentence is painful, but it is honest. Wrong timing often reveals itself through repeated friction that has nothing to do with love itself. The connection feels real, but the circumstances keep interrupting it. You keep missing each other emotionally. One person is always overwhelmed, the other person is always waiting. You keep trying to align, but life keeps shifting. The relationship begins to feel like two hands trying to hold water. This creates emotional fatigue. You start questioning your worth. You start questioning their intentions. You start questioning the bond. But sometimes the bond is fine. The timing is not. The Buddhist view of karma also teaches that everything arises through interdependence. That means no relationship exists in isolation. Family histories, emotional patterns, cultural pressures, financial realities, personal dreams, and spiritual readiness all shape what a relationship can become. When those forces pull in different directions, love alone cannot create harmony. That does not mean love is weak. It means love is not separate from reality. There is also a hidden gift in wrong timing. It teaches patience with life. It teaches humility. It teaches you that you cannot force what you are not ready to receive. It teaches you that sometimes the universe does not say no, it says not yet. But this is where people misunderstand. They turn not yet into obsession. They keep waiting. They keep holding on to hope as if hope is proof. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to the future creates suffering too. If someone is not in your life now, you cannot build your peace on the fantasy that they might return. The healthiest way to honor a wrong timing connection is to take the lesson and keep walking, to grow from it without chaining yourself to it. Because sometimes the karma was not to stay together. The karma was to meet, transform, and separate. This is difficult because it challenges the belief that meaningful connections must be permanent. But not everything meaningful lasts. Some things are meaningful because they were brief, like a sunset, like a song that reaches your heart and ends too soon. The beauty was not in its permanence. The beauty was in its truth while it existed. A relationship that meets at the wrong time can still be deeply true. It can still be one of the most important connections of your life. It can still shape you in ways nothing else could. That is why the grief is so deep, because you are not only grieving the person, you are grieving what it could have been under different conditions. Buddhist wisdom invites you to grieve without drowning, to acknowledge the pain without letting it become your identity, to hold the memory as a teacher, not as a chain. One way to practice this is to stop arguing with the ending. The mind wants to keep proving that it could have worked. But the ending itself is evidence of the conditions. It shows what was possible then. It shows what was not possible then. The relationship ended because something in reality could not support it. Not because you were unlovable, not because they were evil, not because the love was fake, but because the season could not hold the fruit. This understanding allows the heart to soften instead of harden. It allows forgiveness to arise naturally. Forgiveness for them, for yourself, for the timing of life. It also helps you stop carrying bitterness into new connections. Many people become cynical after wrong timing love. They say, life is unfair, love is pointless, nothing lasts. But Buddhist wisdom says impermanence is not meaninglessness. Change does not erase value. A flower that blooms and fades still matters. The real danger is when you let the pain of timing make you close your heart, because then the wrong timing does not just end one connection, it blocks future ones. The lesson is not to stop loving, the lesson is to stop forcing, to recognize that timing is part of karma, and karma is not personal. It is not life targeting you. It is life unfolding through countless conditions, many of which are beyond your control. When you accept this, you become calmer. You stop trying to rewrite the past. You stop replaying every decision. You stop punishing yourself for not being the perfect version of you at the time. You begin to respect the journey, And sometimes, when you look back later, you see how that wrong-timing love prepared you. It taught you what you need. It revealed your patterns. It showed you your capacity for care. It awakened your desire for something deeper. It shaped your standards. It helped you grow into someone who can build a healthier bond in the right season. So the connection was not wasted. It was karmic in the truest sense. It planted seeds. Maybe the seed was self-awareness. Maybe it was emotional maturity. Maybe it was the courage to choose peace. Maybe it was the understanding that love must be supported by readiness, not just feeling. In the end, meeting at the wrong time is one of life's quiet heartbreaks, but it is also one of life's honest teachings. It reminds you that love is real, but timing is real too, and both matter. When you can hold that truth, the heart becomes wiser, not colder, wiser. You stop chasing the version of the relationship that could have been, and you start honoring the version that was. That is how peace begins again. The heart starts to understand that timing can be the reason something ends, even when love was real. The mind begins to loosen its grip on the fantasy of if only. And for a moment, there is relief in realizing that not everything is your fault and not everything is theirs. But right after that relief, another weight often appears. Because even when you accept the season was wrong, even when you stop clinging, even when you stop blaming, a new pain can rise up in a quiet voice that says, "Still, I hurt them." Not on purpose, not with cruelty, not with betrayal in the usual sense, but by changing, by growing, by becoming a version of yourself that no longer fits the shape of what they expected. And suddenly, personal evolution feels like a crime. This is where many people start shrinking again, not because they want to, but because guilt becomes a leash. Tonight we move into that hidden struggle when growth feels like betrayal. Something about this guilt is strange because it doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from doing something necessary. It comes from choosing honesty over comfort. It comes from stepping into adulthood, clarity, healing, or purpose. And watching someone you care about react as if you abandoned them. That is the emotional trap. You start thinking that becoming healthier is the same as becoming hurtful. A short truth sits at the center of this lesson. Growth changes the agreement, even when no one signed it. Many relationships are built on an unspoken contract. Not a spoken promise, but an emotional pattern that both people learn to depend on. It can be as simple as this. One person stays small and the other feels safe. One person stays available and the other feels important. One person stays confused and the other gets to feel needed. One person stays anxious and the other feels powerful. These patterns don't always look toxic at first. Sometimes they look like love. Sometimes they even look like loyalty. But then one person evolves. They learn boundaries. They learn self-respect. They learn how to say no without shaking. They stop apologizing for existing. They stop begging for basic kindness. They stop carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry. They become calmer. They become clearer. They become more whole. And the other person, who once felt comfortable in the old agreement, feels threatened by the new one. This is where guilt begins, because the other person may not say, "I'm afraid you're changing." They may say, "You don't care anymore." They may say, "You think you're better than me." They may say, "You've become cold." They may say, "You've changed." And that word can hit like a punch. Changed. As if change is betrayal, as if growing is disrespect, and as if healing is abandonment. In Buddhist understanding, guilt often comes from attachment to being seen as good. The mind wants to be the good person in every story. It wants to be innocent in the eyes of others. It wants approval. It wants to avoid being blamed. So when someone reacts to your growth with pain or disappointment, your mind panics. It says, "Fix it, go back, make them comfortable again." That is not compassion. That is fear wearing a compassionate mask. Compassion is caring about someone's feelings. Clinging is letting their feelings control your life. When growth feels like betrayal, it is usually because your evolution disrupts what someone relied on you to be. Sometimes they relied on your softness because it meant they never had to face their own harshness. Sometimes they relied on your forgiveness because it meant they never had to change. Sometimes they relied on your availability because it meant they never had to learn how to stand alone. Sometimes they relied on your silence because it meant you would never challenge them. So when you begin speaking honestly, they call it disrespect. When you begin protecting your peace, they call it selfishness. When you stop chasing them, they call it abandonment. When you stop accepting crumbs, they call it arrogance. This is the guilt that confuses so many people because it makes you question your own progress. It makes you feel like you have to choose between becoming whole and keeping the relationship calm. And this is where Buddhist wisdom becomes practical. It asks you to look closely at what guilt is doing. Is guilt helping you act with kindness, or is guilt trying to force you back into an old role? There is a difference between healthy remorse and unhealthy guilt. Healthy remorse happens when you truly harmed someone through carelessness, cruelty, or selfishness. It invites responsibility. It invites repair. It helps you become more conscious. Unhealthy guilt happens when you simply stop being who someone benefited from. It is not about harm. It is about disruption. It is the emotional backlash of change. And unhealthy guilt is dangerous because it can keep you trapped for years. It can keep you apologizing for maturing. It can keep you over-explaining your boundaries. It can keep you tolerating disrespect because you don't want to be the reason someone feels bad. It can keep you performing the old version of yourself, like an actor who forgot the show is over. Growth feels like betrayal, especially in relationships where one person's comfort depended on the other person's staying predictable. Predictable means easy to control. Predictable means no surprises. Predictable means no new standards. Predictable means the relationship stays in a familiar shape, even if that shape hurts. So when you grow, you become unpredictable. Not chaotic, just alive. Not unstable, just honest. And for someone who depended on the old version of you, that can feel like losing safety. The hard truth is this: sometimes people do not miss you. They miss the access they had to you. They miss how much you tolerated. They miss how much you gave without asking for balance. They miss how you stayed even when you were hurting. They miss how you made their life easier, even at your own expense. When you grow, you remove that access, and they feel it as loss. Then they call it betrayal. The guilt becomes even heavier when you are a kind person, when you genuinely care, when you don't want to hurt anyone, when you remember their good moments and not just the painful ones, when you know they have their own wounds. And this is where many people start confusing empathy with self-erasure. They say, I understand why they act this way, so I should accept it. They say, they didn't mean it, so I should stay. They say, they're struggling, so I should sacrifice. But Buddhist compassion does not mean letting someone's pain become your prison. Compassion includes wisdom. Wisdom knows that enabling someone's comfort at the cost of your growth creates suffering for both people. Because if you stay small, you resent them. And if they keep you small, they never grow either. So growth can feel like betrayal at first. But in the long run, growth is often the most honest form of love. Love for yourself, and even love for them, because it stops the cycle of silent harm. There is another reason growth triggers guilt. Many people were trained from a young age to keep peace by abandoning themselves. They learned that love equals compliance. They learned that being good means being easy. They learned that conflict means danger. So when they grow and start taking up space, their nervous system interprets it as wrongdoing. They feel guilty for saying no. They feel guilty for having needs. They feel guilty for wanting a different life. They feel guilty for not being available all the time. They feel guilty for changing their mind. They feel guilty for choosing peace over performance. This guilt is not your moral compass, it is your conditioning, and Buddhism helps you see this clearly. It teaches that suffering comes from ignorance, not ignorance as stupidity, but ignorance as not seeing reality. When you believe your worth is measured by how comfortable you keep others, you live in ignorance. You live under a false rule. That rule says, if they are upset, you did something wrong. But people can be upset because reality changed, not because you attacked them. People can be upset because they lost control, not because you hurt them. People can be upset because your growth reveals their stagnation, not because you betrayed them. So, part of this lesson is learning to stop treating someone's discomfort as proof that you are guilty. Discomfort is not always a sign of harm. Sometimes discomfort is the sign of truth entering the room. Growth often disrupts expectations, and expectations are powerful because they become the hidden foundation of a relationship. Someone expects you to always respond fast. Someone expects you to always forgive quickly. Someone expects you to always be emotionally available. Someone expects you to always choose them over yourself. Someone expects you to always be the same person they first met. But expectations are not reality. They are mental images. When you grow, you break the image, and people grieve the image, but they often blame you for their grief. This is why growth feels like betrayal, because you are being punished for breaking an illusion you never promised to maintain. In Buddhism, there is a deep respect for impermanence. It teaches that everything changes, and when you accept that, you suffer less. Relationships, identities, feelings, plans, desires, and seasons all shift. The problem is that many people build their emotional safety on the belief that things should stay the same. So when you evolve, you are not just changing yourself, you are challenging their entire sense of stability. That can trigger their fear, and fear often speaks as accusation. Fear says, "You're leaving me." Fear says, "You don't love me anymore." Fear says, "You're becoming someone else." Fear says, "You betrayed what we had." But underneath those words is often the simple terror of losing familiarity. This is where you need to hold two truths at once. Their feelings matter, but their feelings are not your chain. You can acknowledge their pain without surrendering your growth. You can listen without collapsing. You can be gentle without reversing your evolution. That is the balance. Compassion without clinging, applied in a new way. When growth feels like betrayal, the mind often tries to fix it by over-explaining. You give long speeches. You write long messages. You keep trying to make them understand. You keep trying to prove your heart. You keep trying to soften the blow with perfect words. But sometimes no amount of explanation will make someone comfortable with your growth, because the problem is not your words. The problem is your freedom. Some people cannot love you when you are free because they love the version of you that was manageable. This is painful, but it is clarifying. It shows you whether the relationship was built on mutual respect or on emotional dependency. A respectful connection can adapt to your growth. It may feel awkward at first, but it finds new balance. A dependent connection fights your growth. It calls it betrayal because it cannot survive without your old role. So the guilt you feel becomes a doorway. It reveals what kind of bond this really was. There is also a spiritual side to this guilt. Many people confuse loyalty with staying the same. They think loyalty means keeping the original version of the relationship alive forever. They think loyalty means never changing the rules. They think loyalty means holding on to old promises even when the person you promised them as is no longer you. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to identities creates suffering. The identity of the supportive one, the identity of the one who always stays, the identity of the one who forgives. These can look noble, but when they become cages, they are no longer wisdom. They are attachment. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is become honest about who you are now. Even if that honesty disrupts comfort, even if that honesty ends the relationship, even if that honesty makes someone disappointed, because living a lie to keep peace is not peace. It is slow violence against the self. And you cannot build a compassionate life on self-betrayal. This is where forgiveness becomes important. Not forgiveness for hurting them on purpose, but forgiveness for being human, forgiveness for evolving, forgiveness for having seasons, forgiveness for not being able to stay in a role forever. When you hold guilt too tightly, you start making your life smaller as payment. You start punishing yourself by staying in places you have outgrown. You start delaying your own growth to avoid someone else's discomfort. But Buddhism invites a different approach. It invites you to feel guilt without obeying it, to notice it in the body, to breathe through it, to let it rise and pass like a wave. Guilt is a feeling. It is not always a truth. If your growth is honest, if your actions are respectful, if your intentions are clean, then guilt is simply the emotional noise of change, and change is always noisy in the beginning. Another part of this lesson is learning how to grow without becoming harsh. Some people, after years of being too soft, swing into cruelty. They become rigid, they become dismissive. They say, "I don't care how you feel." That is not wisdom either. That is the pain of the past speaking. Compassion without clinging means growing with dignity. It means you can hold your boundary without turning it into a weapon. It means you can leave without humiliating. It means you can tell the truth without trying to win. Growth with compassion looks like clarity and kindness together. It sounds like, "I care about you, and I also need to choose what is right for my life." It sounds like, "I understand this hurts, and I still cannot go back." It sounds like, "I'm not rejecting you as a person, but I'm not able to live in this pattern anymore." It sounds like, "I respect what we had, and I also respect who I'm becoming." That kind of language is not meant to convince them. It is meant to keep your heart clean. Because sometimes the hardest part of growth is not losing the relationship. It is losing the version of yourself who needed permission to grow. When you no longer seek permission, guilt shows up like a guard at the gate. It tries to stop you. It tries to say, "If you were a good person, you would stay." But the truth is, goodness is not measured by how much you suffer for others. Goodness is measured by how consciously you live, by how honest you are, by how kind you are without betraying yourself, by how much harm you refuse to continue, even when the harm is quiet and normalized. So when growth feels like betrayal, remind yourself of a simple Buddhist truth. You are not here to keep everyone comfortable. You are here to wake up to reality, to wake up to your own heart, to wake up to the difference between love and fear, to wake up to the difference between compassion and control. And if your growth disrupts someone's expectations, that does not automatically mean you are wrong. It may simply mean the relationship was built on an old version of you. The cleanest way through this guilt is to keep your actions gentle and your direction firm. Do not insult them. Do not punish them. Do not blame them for struggling, but do not shrink yourself to save them from discomfort. Because if you abandon your growth to protect their expectations, you will eventually feel something worse than guilt. You will feel regret. Regret for the life you could have lived. Regret for the peace you postponed. Regret for staying loyal to a version of you that was tired. Regret is heavier than guilt. So choose the path that leads to truth, even if it feels like betrayal at first. In time, clarity replaces guilt. You see that growth did not betray them. It simply revealed what could not grow with you. And then something soft happens. You stop needing them to understand. You stop needing them to approve. You stop needing to be seen as innocent. You become content with being honest. That is when the heart becomes truly free. Not free from love, but free from the prison of performing love the way others demand. And in that freedom, your compassion becomes deeper because it is no longer desperate. It is no longer trying to control outcomes. It is simply the quiet wish that both of you may become who you are meant to be, even if that becoming happens on different paths. When guilt begins to loosen its grip, something quieter takes its place. Not relief exactly, not peace yet, but a sober clarity. You start to see that growth did not destroy love, it simply exposed the limits of what love could carry. And in that clarity, another difficult realization begins to form. You can still care deeply about someone and yet recognize that the version of them you loved no longer exists in the same way. Not because they became bad, not because you became cold, but because people do not remain frozen in time. The heart starts asking a painful question. Can you love who they were without trying to turn them into who you wish they would become? This is where many relationships quietly suffer. Not from lack of love, but from the pressure of expectation. Tonight we move into one of the most humbling lessons of love. Accepting that caring about someone does not give you the right to reshape them. There is a particular kind of sadness that comes from remembering someone at their best while standing in front of who they are now. You remember the tenderness, the effort, the warmth, the way they once listened, the way they once showed up without being asked. Those memories feel alive, almost close enough to touch, and part of you keeps waiting for that version of them to return. But waiting turns into subtle pressure, pressure that hides itself as hope. Pressure that whispers, "You used to be different." Pressure that quietly asks them to become the person you fell in love with again. And this is where love begins to strain under the weight of nostalgia. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often comes from attachment to what was rather than acceptance of what is. When you cling to a past version of someone, you stop seeing them clearly. You start interacting with a memory instead of a human being. You start comparing every present moment to an earlier chapter that cannot be repeated. This does not mean the memories are false. It means they belong to a different time. People grow in ways that are visible and in ways that are hidden. Sometimes they become stronger, sometimes they become more guarded, sometimes they become quieter, sometimes they become restless. Sometimes life shapes them through experiences you were not part of, experiences that altered how they see the world. Loving someone means recognizing that they are not a character in your story. They are the author of their own. When you try to reshape them, even gently, you create tension. They feel unseen, as if who they are now is not enough. They may feel like they are constantly being evaluated against a past version of themselves. They may feel that your affection depends on whether they return to an earlier state. This can make a person withdraw further, not because they don't care, but because they feel they are failing a test they never agreed to take. Trying to reshape someone often comes from fear rather than control. Fear that if they continue changing, the relationship will disappear. Fear that if they become too different, you will lose the connection that once grounded you. Fear that you will become strangers. So the mind attempts a rescue operation. It tries to guide them back toward familiarity. It offers suggestions, advice, reminders of how things used to be. It highlights the differences, hoping awareness will reverse the change. But growth does not reverse on command, and even if it did, it would not be authentic. Buddhist compassion invites you to see the deeper issue. The pain is not that they changed. The pain is that you did not change together in the same way. Two lives rarely evolve at the same speed or in the same direction. Sometimes one person becomes more introspective while the other becomes more outward focused. Sometimes one person seeks stability while the other seeks exploration. Sometimes one person heals while the other is still learning how to cope. When this happens, the gap can feel unbearable because the shared rhythm is gone. Loving the person they were without forcing them to become who you need requires grieving the gap. It requires accepting that no amount of love can erase differences that have already formed. It requires recognizing that wanting them to change is often another form of clinging, clinging to the past version of them, clinging to the identity of the relationship, clinging to the feeling of certainty. There is also a subtle arrogance hidden in the desire to reshape someone. Not arrogance in a cruel sense, but in a hopeful one. It assumes that if you care enough, try hard enough, explain clearly enough, or wait patiently enough, they will eventually become what fits your life again. But love is not sculpting clay. People are not projects. When you love someone, you are loving a moving being, not a fixed form. In Buddhism, there is deep respect for autonomy. Each person carries their own karma, their own path, their own lessons. You can walk beside them for a time, but you cannot walk for them. You cannot choose their awakenings. You cannot accelerate their process. Accepting this can feel powerless, especially if you are used to solving problems. It can feel like giving up, but it is actually surrender to reality, not surrender to defeat. There is a difference between supporting someone's growth and trying to direct it. Support listens, control instructs, support respects pace, control demands urgency, support allows mistakes. Control tries to prevent them, support believes in their capacity. Control assumes they need guidance. When you release the urge to reshape them, something surprising happens. You begin to see them more clearly, not as who they were or who they could be, but as who they are right now. And from that clarity, a new kind of love can emerge, one that is grounded in truth instead of memory. This does not mean you have to accept behavior that harms you. Acceptance is not tolerance of disrespect. It simply means you stop trying to convert them into someone they are not. You acknowledge that who they are may no longer fit the life you need. And that realization is painful because it forces you to let go of the fantasy that love can solve everything. Love can comfort, love can inspire, love can heal, but love cannot override another person's will. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is to stop pushing them toward a version of themselves they are not choosing. There is also a quiet dignity in loving someone without demanding transformation. It shows maturity. It shows that your care is not conditional on them becoming useful to your plans. It shows that you respect their humanity, even when it disappoints you. This kind of love is rare because it asks for emotional independence. It asks you to meet your needs without relying on them to fulfill roles they cannot fulfill. It asks you to build a life that does not depend on their potential. Many relationships collapse because they are built on potential instead of reality. One person falls in love with who the other could be, not who they are. They invest years waiting for that future version to appear. They interpret small improvements as proof that the transformation is coming. But time passes, and the reality remains the same, and then resentment grows. Resentment is the result of expectations that reality refused to meet. Buddhism encourages letting go of attachment to potential, because potential is not a promise, it is a possibility. When you attach to it, you set yourself up for disappointment. Loving the person they were without forcing them to become who you need also means respecting your own limits. It means recognizing that you cannot carry both people's growth. You cannot be the engine of their change. You cannot sacrifice your well-being to keep believing in what might happen someday. There is courage in saying, I care about you, but I cannot build my life on what you might become. This is not rejection, it is honesty. And honesty is kinder than silent frustration. Another layer of this lesson involves memory. Memory can trap you in a loop of comparison. You replay the best moments, the early conversations, the feeling of discovery, the warmth that made everything feel possible. You measure the present against that golden period and feel the loss again. But every relationship has seasons. The beginning is often bright because everything is new. There is curiosity, attention, effort, and excitement. Over time, comfort replaces novelty. Responsibilities increase. personal struggles surface. The relationship becomes part of everyday life rather than a constant source of stimulation. This shift is natural, but it can feel like decline if you are attached to the beginning. Accepting the person they are now means letting go of the illusion that the beginning can be preserved. It also means accepting that you cannot recreate feelings through force. Emotions respond to authenticity, not pressure. When someone senses that they are being pushed to act differently, they often withdraw further. Love that allows freedom tends to feel safer than love that feels like a performance review. There is also a quiet compassion in recognizing that you too are no longer the same person they fell in love with. Your needs changed, your perspective changed, your tolerance changed, your dreams evolved, your fears shifted. Expecting them to stay the same while you evolve creates imbalance, so part of this acceptance is mutual. Two people who once fit may no longer align because both of them grew, not one right, one wrong, just different. When you stop trying to reshape them, you also stop reshaping yourself to match who they need. The relationship becomes honest, even if that honesty leads to distance. Honesty creates clean endings. Pretending creates slow decay. There is peace in loving someone as they are and admitting that who they are does not fit your path anymore. It removes the struggle of constant negotiation. It removes the tension of trying to fix something that is not broken, just different. This kind of peace does not erase sadness, but it transforms it. The sadness becomes respectful rather than desperate. It becomes a quiet acknowledgement of what was shared without trying to rewrite it. You may still wish them well. You may still care about their happiness. You may still remember the good without denying the difficulty. This is the Buddhist middle path. Love without illusion, acceptance without attachment, compassion without control. And eventually, something gentle replaces the urge to reshape them. You begin to appreciate that the person they were helped shape the person you are now. Even if they cannot continue beside you, their influence remains in the lessons you carry forward. You stop seeing the relationship as a failure and start seeing it as a chapter that fulfilled its purpose. Not every love story is meant to become a lifelong partnership. Some are meant to open your heart, teach you boundaries, reveal your patterns, or show you what you truly need. When you release the need to reshape them, you also release the need to reshape the story. You let it be what it was, and that is where healing deepens. Because love that respects reality becomes wisdom. Wisdom that understands you can cherish someone's past presence without demanding their future participation. Wisdom that understands people are not here to complete you, only to accompany you for a time. Wisdom that understands love is not ownership. And in that wisdom, the heart becomes softer, not harder. It learns that letting someone be themselves, even when it hurts, is one of the purest forms of compassion. Not because it is easy, but because it is true. When you finally stop trying to reshape them, a quiet truth begins to surface. You see them as they are. You accept what cannot be forced. You release the illusion that love can rewind time. And in that acceptance, something else becomes visible, something that was there long before any goodbye was spoken. Distance does not always arrive with a slammed door or a final conversation. Sometimes it arrives softly, almost politely, like a guest who never announces themselves. By the time you notice it clearly, it has already settled into the space between you. Tonight, we step into one of the most unsettling experiences in love, the silent distance that appears before the physical goodbye. At first, nothing looks dramatically wrong. The routines still exist, messages are still exchanged, conversations still happen. From the outside, everything seems intact. But inside the connection, the warmth begins to thin. The emotional current that once flowed effortlessly now feels interrupted, as if something invisible is blocking it. You begin to sense it in small ways. Responses become shorter. Eye contact feels fleeting, Laughter feels slightly delayed. The pauses between sentences grow longer. Silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling heavy, like it is carrying words that no one wants to say. This silent distance is confusing because it has no clear cause. There was no moment you can point to and say, that's when it changed. It is more like watching a candle burn down slowly. The light is still there, but the flame is weaker, and you cannot stop the wax from disappearing. Buddhist wisdom teaches that endings rarely begin at the end. They begin long before, in subtle shifts that the mind tries to ignore. Attachment often makes people resist seeing those shifts because acknowledging them would require action, and action would mean facing uncertainty. So the heart stays quiet. It tells itself everything is fine. It waits for the feeling to return. But feelings follow truth, not hope. One of the earliest signs of silent distance is the loss of emotional curiosity. When two people are deeply connected, they naturally want to know each other's inner world. They ask questions. They notice small changes. They remember details. They feel invested in how the other person is experiencing life. When distance begins, that curiosity fades. Not out of cruelty, but out of detachment. Conversations become informational rather than intimate. You talk about schedules, tasks, plans, responsibilities, surface-level topics that keep communication alive without exposing vulnerability. This is not always intentional. Sometimes it happens because both people are tired. Sometimes because they are avoiding conflict. Sometimes because they sense that deeper conversations would reveal uncomfortable truths. So the relationship becomes functional instead of emotional. Another sign is the quiet reduction of shared presence. Time together starts to feel like an obligation rather than a desire. One or both people begin finding reasons to stay busy. Work becomes heavier. Social commitments multiply. Personal projects suddenly demand attention. None of these things are wrong on their own, but they create space where closeness used to live. Distance often hides behind busyness. It feels easier to say, I'm just tired, than to say, I don't feel the same connection anymore. Buddhism encourages awareness of avoidance because avoidance is one of the mind's favorite strategies for escaping discomfort. When people sense that something is changing, they often choose distraction instead of confrontation. They scroll more, they watch more, they work more, they sleep more. Anything that prevents them from sitting in the quiet where the truth would become undeniable. But avoidance does not stop change. It only delays recognition. There is also a shift in emotional safety. You stop sharing certain thoughts because you are unsure how they will be received. You filter yourself more. You test the waters before speaking. You notice that honesty feels risky instead of natural. This is where the heart begins to withdraw to protect itself. Withdrawal is not always dramatic. It can look like becoming quieter, less expressive, less spontaneous. It can look like choosing not to bring up concerns because you don't want another tense conversation. It can look like accepting small disappointments instead of addressing them. Each unspoken truth adds another layer to the distance. Over time, the relationship becomes a place where both people are present physically, but absent emotionally. One of the most painful aspects of silent distance is the uncertainty. You sense something is wrong, but you cannot name it. You wonder if you are imagining it. You question your sensitivity. You ask yourself if you are overthinking. You replay interactions, searching for clues. This uncertainty creates anxiety because the mind prefers a painful truth over an unknown one. At least a truth can be faced. Uncertainty keeps the nervous system alert, scanning for signs of danger that never fully appear. Buddhist mindfulness offers a way to approach this anxiety. Instead of chasing answers outside, it invites you to observe your inner reactions. Notice the tightness in the chest. Notice the restlessness. Notice the urge to demand reassurance. Notice the fear of asking direct questions. These reactions are signals, not problems. They reveal that something meaningful is shifting. Another dimension of silent distance is the loss of shared vision. Plans for the future become vague. Conversations about long-term goals fade. Decisions are made individually instead of collectively. You stop picturing yourselves in the same story ahead. This can feel like standing on a bridge that is slowly dissolving beneath your feet. You are still on it, but you can feel the structure weakening. There is a quiet awareness that eventually something will have to give. People often delay facing this moment because they hope the bridge will stabilize on its own. They hope that time will repair what time is actually eroding. But relationships require active presence, not passive waiting. There is also a subtle shift in emotional responsiveness. When one person shares something important, the other may respond with politeness instead of engagement. They listen, but their energy feels distant. They acknowledge, but they do not lean in. The conversation ends quickly, leaving a feeling of incompleteness. This is not always intentional coldness. Sometimes it reflects emotional exhaustion or internal struggle. Sometimes the person is processing their own doubts and cannot fully show up. But the impact is the same, the sense of being alone while together. Silent distance also changes how conflict appears. Arguments may decrease not because everything is resolved, but because both people stop trying. Conflict requires investment. It requires belief that resolution is possible. When distance grows, people often stop arguing because they no longer see the point. Indifference replaces frustration. And indifference is often more dangerous than anger because it signals disengagement. Buddhist teachings highlight that attachment to harmony can sometimes hide deeper issues. Some people avoid conflict to preserve peace, but the peace becomes superficial. Beneath it, unresolved emotions accumulate, creating pressure that eventually pushes people apart. True harmony comes from honesty, not silence. One of the most heartbreaking realizations is noticing that the person who once felt like home now feels like a guest. You still care about their well-being, you still respect their presence, but the sense of belonging is gone. The space between you feels unfamiliar, as if you're sharing a room with someone you used to know deeply, but now struggle to reach. This feeling can trigger grief even before the relationship officially ends. It is grief for what is already slipping away. Many people stay in this stage for a long time because they fear the finality of acknowledging it. As long as no one speaks the truth, the possibility of restoration still exists. Silence becomes a fragile shelter from reality. But silence also prolongs suffering. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the beginning of liberation. Seeing things clearly, even when painful, is the first step toward peace. Denial may feel safer, but it keeps you trapped in uncertainty. Recognizing silent distance does not mean rushing toward a breakup. It means understanding the state of the connection so that decisions can be made consciously rather than reactively. Sometimes distance can be repaired if both people are willing to face it together. Honest conversation can reopen emotional pathways. Vulnerability can restore closeness. Effort can rebuild trust. But repair requires mutual willingness. If only one person tries while the other remains withdrawn, the distance continues to grow. Another important aspect is self-reflection. Silent distance is not always caused by the other person alone. Sometimes you also withdraw without realizing it. Maybe you stopped sharing because you felt unheard. Maybe you became guarded after repeated disappointments. Maybe you focused on personal healing that made you less dependent on the relationship. Distance can be mutual even when it feels one-sided. Recognizing your own role is not about blame, it is about clarity. It allows you to approach the situation with compassion instead of accusation. There is also a quiet dignity in acknowledging when a connection has reached its limit. Not every distance is meant to be closed. Some distances are signals that the relationship has completed its purpose. The silent phase before a goodbye can be a preparation period. It allows both people to gradually detach rather than experience a sudden rupture. It softens the shock. It creates space for acceptance to grow slowly. This does not make it painless, but it makes it survivable. When the physical goodbye finally happens, it often feels less surprising than expected. Part of you already knew. Part of you had been saying farewell in small ways for a long time. The official ending simply confirms what the heart sensed earlier. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that clinging to what is fading only intensifies suffering. Accepting the fading allows the heart to grieve honestly and then begin healing. The silent distance is not just an ending, it is also a transition. It marks the shift from shared identity to individual paths. It creates the conditions for new experiences, new connections, new understandings of self. But before those new beginnings, there is a quiet period of emptiness, a space where the old connection has not fully left, but the new life has not fully formed. This space can feel lonely, but it is also fertile. It is where insight grows. In that emptiness, you learn to sit with yourself again. You rediscover parts of your identity that were intertwined with the relationship. You rebuild routines that do not depend on someone else's presence. You reconnect with interests, friendships, and dreams that may have been set aside. The silent distance teaches independence. It teaches emotional resilience. It teaches that closeness is not the only way to feel whole. And eventually, it teaches gratitude. Not immediate gratitude, not forced positivity, but a mature appreciation for what the relationship gave you. You see how it shaped your capacity to love, your understanding of boundaries, your awareness of impermanence. You realize that even the distance had meaning. It showed you that connections are living things. They require care, honesty, and alignment. Without those, they drift apart, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence. The physical goodbye is only the visible part of the ending. The real goodbye happens in the heart long before words are spoken. And when you accept that, something shifts. You stop waiting for a dramatic closure to validate your feelings. You trust your perception. You trust your intuition. You trust that the quiet signals were real. This trust becomes the foundation for healthier connections in the future, because once you recognize silent distance, you learn to value presence more deeply. You learn to notice when someone is truly there and when they are only physically present. You learn to protect emotional intimacy instead of assuming it will maintain itself. In the end, the silent distance before goodbye is one of life's gentlest warnings. It whispers instead of shouting. It invites awareness instead of forcing confrontation. If you listen, it can guide you toward truth, and truth, even when painful, always leads toward freedom. When the quiet distance finally reveals itself, another truth often follows behind it. You begin to see that the connection did not fade only because of timing, growth, or silence. Sometimes it fades because the very thing that once held you together no longer exists in the same way. The pain that created closeness begins to dissolve, and with it, the bond that felt unbreakable. This realization can feel unsettling because it challenges a belief many people never question, that suffering shared with someone automatically creates lasting love. Tonight, we move into one of the most bittersweet transformations a heart can experience, outgrowing the pain that once bonded you. There is a strange intimacy that forms between people who meet each other in broken places. When both are hurting, there is less need for explanation. You recognize the exhaustion in their eyes. They recognize the heaviness in your voice. You speak a language built from survival rather than joy, and it creates a powerful sense of understanding. In those moments, the connection feels deep because it is rooted in vulnerability. Pain strips away the masks people usually wear. It exposes fears, insecurities, regrets, and memories that would normally stay hidden. When someone sees those parts of you and does not turn away, it feels like being accepted at your most fragile. This kind of bond can feel sacred. It feels different from connections built on shared interests or circumstances. It feels like two souls finding refuge in each other, while the world feels harsh and unpredictable. But pain is not a stable foundation. It is a temporary state, not a permanent identity. As healing begins, the dynamics shift in ways that can feel confusing. One person may start feeling lighter, calmer, more hopeful. They begin setting boundaries. They learn to regulate emotions. They stop replaying old stories that kept them stuck. They start imagining a future that is not defined by survival. Meanwhile, the other person may still be in the same place emotionally, not because they are weak, but because healing happens at different speeds. This difference creates a new gap that did not exist before. Suddenly, conversations that once felt natural begin to feel mismatched. The person who is healing may no longer want to talk about the past constantly. They may no longer feel comforted by revisiting shared pain. They may want to focus on growth, possibilities, and stability instead of wounds. The person who is still hurting may interpret this as rejection. They may feel abandoned in the place where the connection was strongest. This is one of the most painful paradoxes of healing. Becoming healthier can unintentionally create distance from someone who still needs the version of you who understood their suffering in the same way. Buddhist teachings often describe suffering as a teacher. It forces awareness. It reveals attachment. It exposes illusions. But once the lesson is learned, clinging to the suffering becomes unnecessary. The problem is that not everyone learns the lesson at the same time. When two people are bonded through pain, healing can feel like betrayal because it changes the emotional contract. The contract was never spoken, but it was understood. We hold each other up because we are both struggling. When one person no longer needs that support in the same way, the balance disappears. This can create guilt in the person who is healing. They may feel like they are leaving the other behind. They may feel responsible for the other's continued pain. They may try to slow their own progress to maintain the connection. But slowing healing to preserve a relationship creates new suffering. Buddhism emphasizes that attachment to suffering can be as strong as attachment to pleasure. Some people unconsciously hold on to pain because it gives them identity, familiarity, or connection. When someone they love begins to move beyond that pain, it disrupts the shared narrative. The bond weakens not because love disappears, but because the glue was trauma, not alignment. This does not invalidate the connection, it simply reveals its origin. Outgrowing shared pain also means redefining what intimacy looks like. Many people confuse emotional intensity with closeness. They believe that the more dramatic the experience is, the deeper the love. But true intimacy is not built on chaos. It is built on presence, trust, and stability. When healing begins, intensity often decreases. The relationship becomes calmer, quieter, less urgent. For someone accustomed to intensity, this calm can feel empty or unfamiliar. They may mistake peace for disconnection, but peace is not absence. It is the absence of turmoil. Another layer of this transformation involves identity. When pain has been part of your story for a long time, it becomes intertwined with how you see yourself. You become the one who survived, the one who struggles, the one who understands suffering. When you heal, that identity begins to loosen, and it can feel disorienting. The relationship that formed around that identity may no longer feel relevant. This is not because the other person stopped mattering. It is because the context changed. Buddhist wisdom encourages non-attachment to identity. It teaches that the self is not fixed, that clinging to labels creates suffering. When you release the identity built around pain, you also release the structures that supported it, including relationships that depended on that version of you. There is also grief in realizing that you cannot bring someone with you on a journey they are not ready for. You may wish you could share your insights, your calm, your new perspective. You may try to encourage them to seek healing too, but transformation cannot be transferred. It must be experienced personally. Watching someone you care about remain in pain while you move forward can feel heartbreaking. It can trigger survivor's guilt, a feeling that you escaped while they are still trapped. But healing is not a competition. It is a personal path. Each person walks it in their own time. Another aspect of outgrowing shared pain is the shift in emotional responsibility. When two people bond through trauma, they often become each other's primary source of comfort. They may rely on each other heavily, sometimes to the point of emotional dependency. As healing progresses, one person may start seeking support in healthier ways. They may build friendships, pursue therapy, develop hobbies, or cultivate spiritual practices that stabilize them internally. Their need for constant reassurance decreases. This can leave the other person feeling replaced or unnecessary. The truth is not replacement, but expansion. Healing expands your support system so that one relationship no longer has to carry all your emotional weight. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a movement toward balance. It reduces attachment and creates resilience. But from the perspective of someone who relied on that bond, it can feel like loss. Outgrowing pain also reveals whether the relationship was built on mutual growth or mutual coping. Coping relationships focus on survival strategies. Growth relationships focus on evolution. When coping is no longer needed, the relationship must either transform or dissolve. Transformation requires both people to adapt. If only one adapts, the connection struggles to survive. This is why some relationships end after one person heals. It is not because healing destroyed the love, but because healing changed the conditions that allowed the love to function. There is a quiet beauty in recognizing this. It allows you to honor what the relationship provided without forcing it to continue beyond its purpose. You can appreciate how you supported each other during dark times. You can acknowledge the courage it took to be vulnerable. You can be grateful for the companionship that made survival possible. Gratitude softens the ending. It prevents bitterness from rewriting the past. Buddhism teaches that all relationships are temporary shelters. Some last for decades, some for years, some for moments. Their value is not measured by duration, but by the transformation they enable. The pain that once bonded you served as a shelter when both of you needed protection. When healing arrives, that shelter may no longer be necessary. Stepping out into open space can feel scary because it removes the familiarity of shared suffering, but it also allows sunlight to reach places that were previously in shadow. In that light, new connections become possible, connections based on shared peace rather than shared pain, connections that celebrate growth instead of reinforcing wounds. This does not mean forgetting the past. It means integrating it into a larger story, a story where suffering was a chapter, not the entire book. Outgrowing shared pain also teaches compassion in a new way. Instead of bonding through hurt, you learn to care from a place of stability. You can wish someone well without needing to carry their pain. You can support without absorbing. You can love without merging. This is healthier for both people. It allows them to develop their own strength. It prevents the cycle of mutual dependency. It creates space for individual healing journeys. There is also forgiveness involved. Forgiveness for the ways pain shaped both of you. Forgiveness for misunderstandings, for coping mechanisms that hurt each other, for times when survival instincts overrode kindness. Forgiveness does not erase responsibility, but it releases the weight of resentment. Buddhist compassion includes forgiving yourself for needing support when you were hurting. It also includes forgiving the other person for not being able to grow at the same pace. Not everyone you love is meant to evolve with you. Some are meant to meet you in the valley and part ways before the climb. That does not make the valley meaningless. It means it served its purpose. Eventually, you may notice that your memories of the relationship no longer feel sharp. They feel softer, like photographs faded by time. You remember the comfort, the understanding, the late-night conversations, the shared tears, but you also see the limitations clearly. This balanced view is a sign of healing. You no longer romanticize the pain. You no longer wish to return to the person you were then. You honor the journey without longing for the struggle. And in that space, the heart becomes capable of a different kind of love. A love that does not require suffering to feel real. A love that grows from wholeness rather than need. A love that can exist peacefully without fear of losing itself. Outgrowing the pain that once bonded you is not the end of love. It is the transformation of love into something wiser. Something that recognizes that connection does not have to be permanent to be meaningful. Something that understands that healing can separate paths without erasing respect. Something that trusts that what was shared still lives within you, shaping how you care, how you listen, how you show up for others. And as this understanding settles, the heart begins to feel lighter, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer defines the present. You realize that the bond was real, the pain was real, the growth is real, and now life is asking you to continue forward, carrying the lessons instead of the wounds. That is how healing completes its work, not by erasing the connection, but by transforming its role in your story. From survival to wisdom, from shared hurt to individual peace, from a bond of pain to a memory of compassion, and in that quiet transition, you step into a new chapter where love is no longer tied to suffering, but to freedom. When the pain that once bonded two hearts begins to dissolve, it leaves behind something quiet and clear. You can finally see the relationship without the smoke of shared wounds. You can finally feel your own life without needing the other person as a constant emotional anchor. And sometimes, in that clarity, you realize a truth that is both gentle and devastating. They still love you, they still want you, they still reach for the future with you in it. But the alignment is gone, and this is one of the hardest kinds of letting go, because it does not come with anger to push you forward. It does not come with betrayal to make separation easy. It comes with tenderness. It comes with someone's sincere heart still open, even while your soul knows it cannot remain. Tonight we move into the courage to release someone who still loves you. A quiet kind of grief rises here because most people believe love should be enough. They believe if someone still cares, you must stay. They believe leaving a loving person is cruel. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging to a bond that no longer fits creates suffering for both people, even if affection remains. Sometimes the most compassionate act is to stop forcing a relationship to carry a future it cannot hold. Letting go when love still exists is difficult because it triggers guilt. It makes you feel like the villain in a story where no one did anything wrong. It makes you question your own heart. It makes you wonder if you are ungrateful, restless, or broken. But the truth is simpler. Love can be real and still not be the right place for your life to continue. In Buddhism, there is a deep understanding that suffering often comes from confusing attachment with love. Attachment says, "Stay so I don't have to feel loss." Love says, "May you be free, even if freedom separates us." This kind of release requires maturity because it asks you to honor two truths at once. Their love is real, your misalignment is real, and denying either truth creates harm. Many people stay because they cannot bear the pain of hurting someone who cares about them. They would rather slowly disappear inside the relationship than face the sharp moment of separation. They choose comfort over truth. They choose familiarity over integrity. But staying when alignment is gone does not protect the other person. It only delays the wound and often makes it deeper. Because when you stay without alignment, you begin to withdraw. Not always intentionally, but naturally. Your enthusiasm fades, your presence becomes partial, your affection becomes inconsistent. You start giving less Not because you want to punish them, but because you cannot pour your whole heart into a life that no longer feels true. The other person senses this. They may not say it directly, but they feel it. They feel the distance, the hesitation, the lack of emotional warmth. And that creates confusion. They start working harder. They start trying to fix what they cannot name. They start blaming themselves. They start thinking love is something they have to earn again. This is where staying becomes more cruel than leaving. Because you are asking them to live in uncertainty, to keep guessing, to keep reaching for someone who is already halfway gone. Buddhist compassion does not mean avoiding pain at all costs. It means choosing the kindest form of pain, the pain that is honest, the pain that clears the air, the pain that allows healing to begin instead of stretching suffering across months and years. Releasing someone who still loves you also challenges the ego in a different way. Most people want to be wanted. They want to feel chosen. Being loved can feel like proof that you matter. So letting go of someone who still loves you can feel like throwing away validation. That is why it takes courage. You are not only releasing a person, you are releasing the comfort of being needed. Sometimes alignment disappears because your values changed. You may have grown into a life that requires different priorities. Maybe you want peace and they thrive on chaos. Maybe you want stability and they avoid responsibility. Maybe you want emotional honesty and they stay shut down. Maybe you want spiritual growth and they mock it. Maybe you want a life with purpose and they want a life with convenience, and still they love you. Love does not automatically create shared direction. It is possible for someone to love you deeply and still not be able to meet you where you are going. This is where people confuse affection with partnership. Affection is feeling. Partnership is alignment of daily life, values, vision, and mutual growth. When partnership is missing, love becomes painful because it keeps pulling you back into a life that does not match your becoming. Releasing someone who still loves you also means facing the fear of regret. The mind says, what if I don't find this again? What if I'm making a mistake? What if my standards are too high? What if this is just a phase? Buddhist mindfulness teaches that fear often speaks in future fantasies. It creates images of loneliness, failure, and loss to keep you attached to the familiar. But fear is not a reliable guide. Fear is just the mind trying to protect itself from uncertainty. To release someone with courage, you must learn to listen to something deeper than fear. You must listen to truth. Truth is quieter than fear. Truth does not shout. Truth does not panic. Truth feels like a steady knowing in the body. Even when your heart aches, truth feels clear. This is how you know alignment is gone. It is not because you hate them. It is because your inner life no longer relaxes in the relationship. You may feel heavy when you think about the future together. You may feel relief when you imagine distance. You may feel like you are forcing yourself to stay enthusiastic. You may feel like you are constantly negotiating your own needs to maintain the bond. These are not signs of cruelty. They are signs of misalignment. Another reason this release is hard is because the other person may not understand. They may say, "But I love you." They may list everything they have done. They may promise change. They may cry. They may plead. They may hold your hand as if holding tighter can solve what is happening. And this can break you because their love is genuine. But Buddhist compassion reminds you that love is not a contract that cancels reality. Their love does not automatically make the relationship right. Their love does not automatically mean you must stay. Sometimes the most loving response is to acknowledge their love without using it as a reason to betray your truth. This requires clean language, not harsh language. It requires clarity without cruelty. It requires saying what is true without turning them into the problem. Because sometimes nobody is the problem. The problem is that two lives no longer fit together. Releasing someone who still loves you also means letting go of the fantasy of a perfect ending. Many people want closure that feels clean, mutual, peaceful, with full understanding on both sides, but reality rarely gives that. One person is often ready before the other. One person sees the misalignment clearly, while the other still believes love can repair everything. Buddhist teaching on impermanence helps here. It reminds you that you cannot control how someone receives an ending. You can only control how honestly and gently you offer it. So courage includes accepting discomfort. It includes accepting that they may be hurt, they may be angry, they may not understand, they may blame you, they may call you selfish, they may beg you to stay. If you let their reaction determine your choice, you will remain trapped. Compassion without clinging must be practiced again here. Compassion says, I see your pain. Non-clinging says, I will not trade my truth for your comfort. This is not coldness, this is integrity. A compassionate release also includes honoring what existed. When you let someone go with dignity, you do not erase the relationship. You do not rewrite history into hatred to make leaving easier. You do not demonize them to justify your choice. You simply acknowledge the truth. Love existed, but alignment did not. This is one of the most mature forms of love because it refuses to use violence to end something. It ends with respect. Respect is not staying forever. Respect is ending without destroying. Another aspect of courage is facing loneliness. Even if the relationship wasn't aligned, it still provided companionship, routine, familiarity, and emotional warmth. Leaving removes those comforts. The mind fears that emptiness, so it tries to convince you to stay. But Buddhism teaches that emptiness is not punishment, it is space. Space where you can hear yourself again. Space where you can rebuild your life around what is true. Space where you can meet your own heart without distraction. Many people mistake loneliness for proof they made the wrong choice, but loneliness is simply the nervous system adjusting to change. It is the body learning a new rhythm. It does not mean you should return, it means you are human. If you return to a misaligned relationship just to escape loneliness, you will create a deeper loneliness later. The loneliness of being with someone while not being fully alive. There is also a spiritual lesson here. Releasing someone who still loves you is an act of non-possessive love. It is the willingness to let love remain love without turning it into imprisonment. It is the willingness to let someone love you without using their love as a reason to stay trapped. This kind of love is rare because it does not feed the ego. It does not feed the identity of being chosen. It does not feed the comfort of being needed. It feeds truth, and truth creates peace. One of the kindest things you can do for someone who loves you is to stop accepting their love if you cannot return it in the way they deserve, because they deserve a partner who is aligned, present, and fully committed, not someone staying out of guilt. Staying out of guilt is a hidden form of disrespect. It treats their love as something you can keep receiving without giving back fully. Courage is choosing honesty over convenience. Courage is saying, I care, but I cannot continue. Courage is walking away without hatred. Courage is letting them be free to find someone who can walk their path with full alignment. This is why the Buddhist perspective is so powerful here. It does not romanticize attachment. It does not encourage staying simply to avoid pain. It encourages acting from wisdom, which means recognizing when a relationship has become a source of suffering for both people. Sometimes the suffering is quiet, but it is still suffering. It is the suffering of compromise that erodes self-respect. It is the suffering of pretending. It is the suffering of delaying your own life. It is the suffering of making someone else work for a love that is no longer aligned. Ending that suffering is compassion, even if it hurts. And yes, this release leaves grief. It leaves tears. It leaves nights where you miss them. It leaves moments where you remember the good and wonder why it still wasn't enough. But that grief is clean, because it is not mixed with lies. Over time, that clean grief becomes acceptance, and acceptance becomes peace. The most profound part of this lesson is realizing that love is not proven by staying. Love is proven by the quality of your truth. Love is proven by the courage to act with integrity even when it costs you comfort. So if the heart is facing this situation, if someone still loves you but alignment is gone, remember this. Leaving does not mean the love was fake. Leaving does not mean you are cold. Leaving does not mean you failed. Leaving can mean you finally respected reality. And respecting reality is one of the deepest Buddhist practices of all, because reality is where liberation begins. When you stop forcing what cannot fit, the heart becomes free. Not free from caring, but free from suffering. And in that freedom, you honor both lives. You honor them by not keeping them in a relationship that cannot hold your full presence. You honor yourself by not staying in a life that cannot hold your true becoming. That is courage, quiet, painful, sacred courage, and it is one of the clearest signs that love has matured into wisdom. After finding the courage to release someone even while love still existed, another layer of truth begins to unfold. You start looking back, not with regret, but with clarity. You begin to question the reasons you stayed as long as you did. You begin to see that not everything you called loyalty was actually love. Some of it was fear. Some of it was attachment disguised as virtue. Some of it was the quiet belief that leaving would make you a bad person. This realization can feel unsettling because loyalty is praised as something noble. People are taught to stay, to endure, to prove their devotion through persistence. But tonight we step into a deeper understanding, recognizing when attachment is masquerading as loyalty. There is a specific heaviness that comes from staying somewhere your heart has already outgrown. It does not feel like love. It feels like obligation. It feels like carrying a responsibility that no one openly assigned to you, yet you believe you must fulfill. You tell yourself you are being strong. You tell yourself you are honoring history. You tell yourself leaving would erase everything that was shared. But beneath those thoughts, there is often a quieter truth. You are afraid of change. Attachment thrives on familiarity. Even if the relationship is painful, predictable pain can feel safer than uncertain freedom. The human mind prefers known discomfort over unknown possibility because uncertainty feels dangerous. Buddhism teaches that attachment is rooted in the illusion of control, the belief that holding on will prevent loss, even when loss has already begun internally. Loyalty, on the other hand, comes from love and respect, not fear. Loyalty does not demand that you sacrifice your growth. Loyalty does not require you to ignore reality. Loyalty does not silence your inner voice. True devotion supports evolution. It does not imprison it. One of the clearest signs that attachment is disguised as loyalty is when staying feels like survival rather than choice. You do not stay because your heart is full. You stay because leaving feels impossible. You stay because you cannot picture life without the structure the relationship provides. You stay because your identity became entangled with the role you played. This is not loyalty. This is dependency wrapped in moral language. Buddhist philosophy often speaks about the suffering caused by clinging. Clinging is not love. Clinging is fear of losing something that has become part of how you define yourself. When you cling to a relationship out of fear, you are not honoring the other person. You are protecting your own sense of stability. Another sign is when you feel more relief than joy when you think about staying. Joy energizes. Relief simply reduces anxiety. If your primary feeling about the relationship is relief that it has not ended yet, rather than genuine happiness that it exists, attachment is likely present. Attachment also keeps people focused on the past. You remind yourself of how things used to be. You replay memories to justify staying. You treat history like a contract that cannot be broken. But history is not a reason to remain somewhere that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. Loyalty honors the past without being controlled by it. Attachment is controlled by the past. There is also the fear of being seen as someone who gives up. Many people stay in relationships because they want to see themselves as strong, patient, and dependable. Leaving feels like admitting failure. It feels like abandoning the identity of being the one who never walks away. But strength is not measured by how long you endure misalignment. Strength is measured by your willingness to face truth even when it challenges your self-image. In Buddhist practice, there is a concept of right intention. Actions are evaluated not only by what is done, but by the motivation behind them. Staying out of love has a different energy than staying out of fear. The external behavior may look identical, but internally they are worlds apart. If your intention is to avoid loneliness, avoid guilt, avoid judgment, avoid uncertainty, then attachment is guiding you. If your intention is to nurture a bond that supports both people's well-being, then loyalty is guiding you. Another revealing moment happens when you imagine the relationship ending. If the dominant emotion is panic rather than sadness, attachment is present. Panic signals fear of losing security, routine, identity, or validation. Sadness signals genuine love for what was shared. Attachment fears losing what the relationship provided. Love grieves losing the person. This difference is subtle but profound. Attachment also often creates a narrative that you cannot survive without the other person. It exaggerates the importance of the relationship to the point where leaving feels like stepping into emptiness. But Buddhism reminds us that nothing external can complete the self permanently. True stability comes from inner grounding, not external anchors. When you realize you can exist, grow, and even flourish without the relationship, attachment begins to loosen. Another aspect is the role of guilt. Attachment frequently uses guilt as a leash. You think about what the other person has done for you, the sacrifices they made, the support they offered during difficult times. You feel indebted. You believe leaving would erase your gratitude. But gratitude does not require lifelong proximity. You can appreciate what someone gave you without continuing a relationship that no longer serves either of you. Loyalty includes honesty. It does not demand silent endurance. There is also a tendency to romanticize suffering when attachment is present. You convince yourself that enduring pain proves the depth of your love. You believe that if you leave, it means the love was not strong enough. But suffering is not proof of devotion. Sometimes suffering is simply a sign that something is misaligned. Buddhist wisdom encourages compassion for oneself as well as others. Staying in a painful situation out of fear is not compassionate toward yourself. It prolongs distress and prevents growth. Recognizing attachment also involves noticing how you talk to yourself about the relationship. If your inner dialogue sounds like persuasion, constant reminders of reasons to stay, attempts to suppress doubts, efforts to minimize your needs, attachment is likely involved. Loyalty does not require constant convincing. It feels steady and calm. Another sign is losing touch with your authentic desires. You may stop asking yourself what you truly want because the answer feels inconvenient. You focus on maintaining the relationship rather than understanding your own evolving needs. Over time, this creates resentment, not toward the other person, but toward yourself. Resentment is often the voice of a silenced self. Buddhism teaches that ignoring inner truth leads to suffering. The path to peace involves acknowledging reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Attachment also makes people overestimate the consequences of leaving. The mind creates catastrophic scenarios, permanent loneliness, regret, failure, social judgment. These stories keep you frozen, but most of these fears are projections, not predictions. Loyalty is grounded in reality. Attachment is fueled by imagined disaster. One of the most liberating realizations is that leaving a misaligned relationship does not invalidate the loyalty you once felt. It simply means loyalty must evolve. You can be loyal to the truth of the present rather than the comfort of the past. You can be loyal to growth. You can be loyal to authenticity. You can be loyal to a future that requires change. This shift transforms loyalty from something restrictive into something empowering. There is also the recognition that devotion does not always mean staying physically close. Sometimes devotion means stepping away so both people can grow in directions that support their well-being. Holding on to someone who needs a different path is not loyalty. It is resistance. Buddhist compassion includes allowing others the freedom to evolve, even if that evolution separates you. As clarity deepens, you begin to see the relationship more objectively. You notice patterns you previously ignored. You understand why certain conflicts kept repeating. You recognize how attachment influenced decisions. This awareness is not meant to create blame. It is meant to create wisdom. Wisdom prevents repetition. Without it, attachment simply finds a new object. Another important lesson is learning to tolerate uncertainty. Attachment seeks guarantees, reassurance that everything will remain stable. Loyalty, when healthy, accepts that relationships change. It trusts that honesty is more valuable than permanence. When you release attachment, you do not become cold or detached from love. You become capable of loving without needing to control the outcome. This is what Buddhism calls non-attachment, caring deeply without clinging. Non-attachment is often misunderstood as indifference. In reality, it is the purest form of love because it allows both people to exist freely. Recognizing when attachment is disguised as loyalty also prepares you for healthier relationships in the future. You become more aware of your motivations. You notice early signs of dependency. You learn to choose partners who support your growth rather than only your comfort. You also become more compassionate toward others who struggle with attachment. You understand how difficult it is to release something familiar. You see that clinging often comes from fear, not malice. This compassion allows you to move forward without bitterness. Eventually, the guilt softens, the fear quiets, the identity of being the one who stays dissolves. In its place emerges a new identity, someone who values truth over appearance, alignment over obligation, peace over performance. You realize that loyalty to yourself is not selfish, it is necessary, because abandoning yourself to preserve a relationship is the deepest form of betrayal. Buddhist teachings often return to the idea of right relationship, a connection that reduces suffering rather than increasing it. When attachment is driving your choices, suffering multiplies. When awareness guides your choices, suffering begins to decrease. This awareness becomes a compass. It helps you navigate love without losing yourself. It helps you stay where your presence is genuine. It helps you leave where your presence has become performative. And as this understanding settles into your heart, a quiet freedom appears. Not the dramatic freedom of escape, but the calm freedom of knowing you are no longer pretending. You are no longer confusing fear with devotion. You are no longer staying out of habit. You are choosing consciously. That is what transforms attachment into wisdom. And in that wisdom, love becomes lighter. It becomes something that enhances life rather than confines it. It becomes something that flows rather than something you grip tightly. You realize that loyalty is not proven by how long you stay, but by how honestly you live. And honesty, even when difficult, always leads towards peace. This is the moment where the heart stops negotiating with reality and begins walking beside it. A place where devotion and freedom no longer oppose each other. A place where love can exist without fear of change. A place where you can honor what was, accept what is, and step into what is waiting without chains disguised as virtues. This is how attachment finally loosens its hold, revealing the quiet strength that was always there, the strength to love without losing yourself. When attachment loosens and clarity begins to take its place, something unexpected happens. The story of the relationship stops feeling like a failure and starts feeling like a chapter that completed its purpose. You begin to see that not everything that changes is broken. Some things simply evolve beyond the form you were used to. And this is where the heart encounters one of the most profound teachings in Buddhism: the understanding that nothing, not even love, is meant to remain fixed. There is a quiet sadness in realizing that even the most meaningful connections are subject to change. It touches something deep because the human heart longs for permanence. It wants to believe that if something is true today, it will remain true forever. But life does not follow that promise. Tonight, we step into the Buddhist view of impermanence in relationships, seeing love as something that transforms rather than something meant to stay exactly the same. At the center of Buddhist teaching is the concept of impermanence, the understanding that all things arise, change, and pass away. This is not presented as a pessimistic idea, but as a description of reality. Seasons change, bodies age, thoughts shift. Circumstances evolve. Relationships are not separate from this flow. They are part of it. When people resist this truth, suffering grows. They try to hold the relationship in a fixed shape, even as both individuals continue changing. They compare the present to the past and feel disappointed that the same intensity, excitement, or closeness no longer exists. They interpret transformation as loss rather than movement. But impermanence does not mean that love disappears. It means love changes its expression. The kind of love that exists at the beginning of a relationship is not the same love that exists years later. Early love is often fueled by discovery, curiosity, and idealization. Later love, if it matures, becomes quieter, steadier, less dramatic, but more grounded. When relationships end, love may transform again into care from a distance, gratitude for what was shared, or a gentle wish for the other person's happiness. Understanding this allows the heart to stop clinging to a single version of love as the only valid one. Impermanence also explains why trying to recreate the past rarely works. Many people spend years trying to get back to how things used to be. They revisit places, repeat routines, replay memories, hoping the old feelings will return. But the people involved are no longer the same. Even if the environment is identical, the internal world has changed. Buddhist wisdom encourages acceptance of this shift rather than resistance to it. Acceptance does not erase the pain, but it removes the layer of frustration created by fighting reality. Another aspect of impermanence in relationships is recognizing that people evolve at different speeds. One person may be moving towards stability while the other is still exploring. One may seek quiet while the other seeks stimulation. One may be healing while the other is still processing. These differences do not necessarily mean anyone is wrong. They reflect the natural diversity of human journeys. When alignment fades, impermanence invites compassion instead of blame. It shifts the question from who failed to what changed. Love can still exist even when compatibility no longer does. This perspective softens endings. Instead of seeing them as abrupt breaks, they can be seen as transitions from one form of connection to another. Sometimes the connection moves from daily intimacy to occasional communication. Sometimes from partnership to friendship, sometimes from presence to memory. Memory itself becomes a form of love transformed. Holding on to memories without needing the relationship to continue is a sign of emotional maturity. It allows you to appreciate what was beautiful without demanding that it still exist in the same way. Impermanence also teaches humility. It reminds us that we cannot control every outcome, no matter how deeply we care. Effort matters, but it does not override the natural flow of change. Two people can try sincerely and still grow apart. This does not mean the effort was wasted. It means the relationship fulfilled its role. Buddhism often uses the metaphor of a river. You cannot step into the same river twice because the water is always moving. Relationships are similar. Even when you remain with the same person, the connection is continuously evolving. Recognizing this helps you adapt rather than cling. Clinging often comes from fear that if something changes, it will lose value. But transformation does not erase meaning. A flower that blooms and fades still has value. A sunset that lasts only minutes still matters. The temporary nature of something can make it more precious, not less. When applied to love, this understanding shifts how you experience connection. You begin to appreciate the present moment instead of obsessing over permanence. You listen more carefully. You show affection more openly. You forgive more quickly. You express gratitude while the connection is still alive. Impermanence encourages presence. It says, this moment matters because it will not repeat in the same way. Another healing aspect is releasing the idea that relationships should follow a specific timeline. Society often promotes a script: meet, fall in love, stay together forever. When a relationship diverges from this script, people feel like they've failed. But impermanence suggests there is no single correct duration for love. Some relationships last a lifetime. Others last long enough to change you, then end. Duration does not determine significance. A short connection can alter the course of your life more than a long one. Recognizing this allows you to respect relationships for their impact rather than their length. Impermanence also reveals why holding resentment for too long becomes exhausting. If everything is changing, the person you are angry at is not even the same person who caused the hurt. They are evolving, just as you are. This does not mean you excuse harmful behavior, but it opens the door to forgiveness because you see that clinging to anger ties you to a past that no longer exists. Forgiveness becomes a form of release from attachment to pain. Another important insight is that impermanence applies to your own feelings as well. The intensity of grief after a breakup feels permanent at first. It feels like the sadness will never lift. But over time, emotions shift. What once triggered tears may later trigger reflection or even gratitude. Trusting this process helps you endure difficult phases without panic. Buddhist practice often involves observing emotions without identifying with them completely. Instead of saying, "I am broken," you learn to say, "There is sadness here." This subtle shift creates space between you and the feeling, allowing it to move rather than solidify. Impermanence also reframes the idea of commitment. Commitment is not about freezing a relationship in place. It is about choosing to grow alongside change as long as alignment remains. When alignment disappears, commitment to truth may require letting go rather than holding on. This perspective removes the shame from endings that occur despite sincere effort. Another layer of transformation involves self-discovery. As relationships change, you discover new aspects of yourself. You learn what you value, what you need, what you can offer, what you cannot compromise. Each connection becomes a mirror reflecting parts of your identity. Impermanence ensures that this reflection never stops. You are not the same person you were at the beginning of the relationship, and that evolution is part of life's design. There is also a gentle comfort in knowing that even pain is temporary. The heaviness you feel now will not define you forever. Healing will come, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly. One day, you will realize that the story no longer hurts in the same way. It becomes something you carry with understanding rather than something that controls you. This is how transformation completes itself. Love, in the Buddhist view, is not a possession you hold. It is an experience you participate in. It flows through different forms, teaching lessons, shaping character, opening the heart, and sometimes closing chapters so new ones can begin. When you accept this, you stop measuring relationships by whether they lasted forever. You start measuring them by whether they helped you grow in compassion, awareness, and authenticity. You also become less afraid of future connections. Knowing that impermanence is natural allows you to love again without the illusion that you can prevent all change. You learn to love fully while understanding that everything is temporary. This does not make love weaker, it makes it more sincere. Because when you know something is not guaranteed forever, you treat it with more care while it exists. Impermanence also teaches resilience. You realize that endings, while painful, are survivable. You have already lived through change. You have adapted before. This knowledge reduces fear and increases confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty. As the heart integrates this wisdom, a quiet peace emerges. You stop asking why things could not stay the same. You start appreciating how they transformed you. You see that every relationship, whether lasting or temporary, leaves traces of learning that become part of your inner foundation. In this way, love never truly disappears. It changes form, but its influence remains. It becomes part of your capacity to care, to understand, to empathize with others who are going through similar experiences. The Buddhist view of impermanence does not remove the pain of loss, but it removes the illusion that loss is unnatural. It reminds you that change is the fabric of existence, not an interruption of it. And when you stop resisting this flow, something unexpected happens. You begin to feel lighter, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped trying to control what cannot be controlled. You allow relationships to be what they are in the present, rather than what they used to be or what you hoped they would become. This acceptance opens space for genuine connection based on who both people are now, not who they once were. It also prepares the heart for new forms of love that align with your current self. In the end, impermanence is not the enemy of love. It is what allows love to remain alive. Without change, relationships would stagnate. With change, they have the chance to evolve, deepen, or conclude with meaning. Seeing love as something that transforms rather than something meant to remain fixed frees you from the fear that endings erase value. It shows you that every connection is part of a larger unfolding, guiding you toward deeper understanding of yourself and others. And in that understanding, the heart learns to hold gently instead of gripping tightly, to appreciate without demanding, to release without bitterness, to love without needing forever as proof. This is the quiet wisdom that turns loss into insight and endings into new beginnings. A wisdom that allows you to walk forward carrying not the weight of what ended, but the light of what it taught you. As the understanding of impermanence settles into the heart, something inside you begins to quiet down. The urgency fades. The need to explain everything disappears. You stop chasing resolution, and you stop resisting what has already changed. Peace arrives slowly, not as excitement, but as a steady absence of turmoil. And yet this calm does not always create harmony with the people around you. Sometimes it does the opposite. Because when you become peaceful, you also become different. And not everyone feels comfortable with the version of you that no longer reacts the way you used to. There is a particular kind of tension that arises when your inner calm collides with someone else's unresolved chaos. It feels confusing because you are not doing anything harmful. You are simply no longer participating in the emotional patterns that once defined the connection. Tonight we move into a subtle but powerful dynamic when your peace triggers their insecurity. At first, the change may appear small. You respond instead of reacting. You pause before speaking. You no longer raise your voice. You no longer chase arguments. You do not take the bait when conflict is offered. You stay grounded even when the other person tries to pull you into emotional turbulence. From your perspective, this feels like growth. From their perspective, it can feel like distance. People who were used to relating through intensity may interpret calmness as indifference. They may feel that you no longer care because you are not displaying the same urgency, jealousy, or emotional volatility. They may miss the chaos because it was familiar. It reassured them that the connection was still alive. Chaos can create the illusion of passion. When peace replaces chaos, it exposes what was underneath: insecurity, fear of abandonment, or dependence on emotional stimulation to feel connected. Buddhist teachings describe inner peace as a form of freedom. It frees you from being controlled by every external event. But freedom can be threatening to someone who relied on your emotional reactivity as a way to feel significant or secure. If they were used to you chasing them during conflicts, your calm withdrawal feels like rejection. If they were used to provoking reactions to feel important, your non-response feels like invisibility. If they were used to measuring love by intensity, your steadiness feels unfamiliar and unsettling. Your peace becomes a mirror reflecting their unrest, and not everyone is ready to look into that mirror. One of the most painful realizations is that growth can disrupt dynamics that once felt stable. The relationship may have unconsciously balanced itself around your emotional patterns. When you change those patterns, the balance shifts. The other person may try to pull you back into old behaviors because that is where they feel comfortable. They may accuse you of being distant. They may say you have changed. They may claim you are cold, uncaring, or detached. These accusations often come from confusion rather than malice. They are trying to understand why the emotional formula that used to work no longer produces the same results. Buddhist mindfulness teaches that when someone reacts strongly to your calm, it reveals their attachment to a certain version of you. They are not only responding to who you are now, they are grieving the loss of who you used to be. This grief may come out as criticism. It may come out as attempts to provoke you. It may come out as guilt-inducing statements, but beneath it is fear. Fear that the connection is slipping away because the familiar emotional language is gone. Another layer of this dynamic involves identity. If the relationship was built around mutual chaos, your peace can feel like abandonment of the shared identity. You were the passionate one, the intense one, the reactive one. When you become calm, the other person may feel like they lost the role they played in your emotional life. They may not know how to relate to the new version of you. This uncertainty can create insecurity because it removes predictability. Predictability feels safe, even if it is unhealthy. Unpredictable calm feels threatening because it cannot be controlled. Your peace also removes excuses. When both people are chaotic, mistakes can be blamed on intensity. When one person becomes stable, the other can no longer hide behind the same justifications. This can create discomfort because it forces accountability. Sometimes the other person may try to test your calm. They may push boundaries, bring up old issues, or create unnecessary conflict to see if you will react. This is not always conscious manipulation. It is often a search for reassurance that the emotional connection still exists. If you respond with the same calm, they may feel even more unsettled. Buddhist compassion suggests recognizing this behavior as a sign of suffering rather than taking it personally. Their insecurity is not something you caused by becoming peaceful. It is something that existed before and is now more visible. Your role is not to return to chaos to make them comfortable. Your role is to remain steady while offering kindness without enabling destructive patterns. Another challenge arises when your peace exposes incompatibility. If the relationship relied on drama to feel meaningful, removing drama reveals whether deeper alignment exists. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. When it does not, both people feel the emptiness differently. You may feel relief, they may feel loss. This difference in emotional experience can create misunderstanding. They may interpret your relief as proof that you never cared. In reality, your relief comes from no longer living in constant tension. Buddhism emphasizes that peace is not withdrawal from love. It is the absence of suffering that comes from clinging. But to someone who equates love with emotional intensity, peace can look like disengagement. Communication becomes essential here. Explaining that you're calm does not mean lack of care can soften the transition, but communication cannot force understanding. Some people need time to adjust. Others may never fully understand because they are not ready for the same growth. There is also the temptation to shrink your peace to preserve the relationship. You may feel pressure to react more, argue more, or display stronger emotions to reassure them. But pretending to be less healed than you are creates internal conflict. It disconnects you from your authentic self. True compassion does not require self-betrayal. Maintaining peace while someone struggles with insecurity requires patience. It requires not responding defensively to accusations. It requires acknowledging their feelings without accepting distorted narratives about your intentions. You can say, "I understand this feels different," without agreeing that you have done something wrong. You can offer reassurance without returning to unhealthy patterns. You can stay present without sacrificing your stability. Another important aspect is recognizing your limits. You cannot regulate someone else's insecurity entirely. You can support, but you cannot fix. Their healing is their responsibility, just as yours was yours. If they are willing to grow, your peace can become an invitation rather than a threat. They may start observing how you handle stress differently. They may ask questions. They may become curious about the practices that helped you. Over time, they may develop their own calm. But if they resist growth, the gap may widen. This widening does not mean you failed. It means the relationship is revealing its capacity. Buddhist teachings often highlight that people enter our lives at different stages of awareness. Some walk beside us for long distances. Others accompany us only briefly. When paths diverge, it is not always because of conflict. Sometimes it is because evolution is not synchronized. Your peace becomes a compass pointing you toward environments that support your well-being. Staying in constant proximity to chaos can erode that peace over time. Protecting your calm is not selfish. It is necessary for continued growth. This protection may involve setting boundaries. Boundaries are not walls meant to punish others. They are guidelines that preserve emotional health. You may need to limit certain conversations, avoid topics that trigger unnecessary conflict, or reduce exposure to situations that destabilize you. Boundaries communicate self-respect. They also communicate that the relationship must adapt to your growth rather than expecting you to reverse it. There is also a quiet sadness in realizing that not everyone will celebrate your peace. Some people preferred you when you were struggling because it made them feel needed, superior, or secure. Your healing removes those roles, and without them, the relationship must redefine itself. Redefinition can be uncomfortable, but it is also an opportunity for authenticity. When peace becomes your baseline, you begin to notice which relationships nourish you and which drain you. You gravitate toward people who value calm communication, mutual respect, and emotional stability. You feel less drawn to environments where chaos is normalized. This shift is not rejection of others, it is alignment with your own evolution. Buddhism teaches that inner peace is contagious, but only for those who are open to it. For others, it may feel like a foreign language they are not ready to learn. Your task is not to translate endlessly. Your task is to live the language quietly. Over time, the tension may soften, the other person may adapt. They may learn that peace does not mean distance, that calm does not mean absence of love, that stability does not mean loss of passion. Or they may drift away, seeking dynamics that match their emotional rhythm. Either outcome is part of the natural unfolding of relationships. The most important lesson is that your peace is not something to apologize for. It is the result of courage, self-reflection, and healing. It deserves protection, not sacrifice. When you honor your calm, you honor the journey that brought you there. You also create space for relationships built on mutual stability rather than mutual chaos. Eventually, you may feel compassion for the person whose insecurity was triggered. You recognize that they are still navigating their own inner storms. You wish them clarity without needing to remain inside the storm with them. This is mature love, love that does not require proximity to exist. Love that allows both people to grow in directions that support their well-being. As this understanding settles, the tension dissolves. You stop feeling responsible for managing their emotions. You stop interpreting their reactions as evidence that something is wrong with you. You accept that your peace will not resonate with everyone, and that is okay. Peace is not meant to be universal approval. It is meant to be inner freedom. And in that freedom, relationships become choices rather than obligations. You choose connections that respect your calm. You choose environments that nurture your stability. You choose conversations that deepen understanding rather than ignite conflict. This is how healing reshapes love, not by removing challenges, but by changing how you respond to them. When your peace triggers insecurity, it reveals both the progress you have made and the work that still remains for others. It marks the moment when you step out of old patterns and into a life guided by awareness. A life where calm is not fragile, but rooted. A life where love is not measured by chaos, but by clarity. A life where you no longer need storms to feel alive. And in that quiet strength, you become a different kind of presence. Not dramatic, not reactive, but steady enough to hold space for yourself and, when possible, for others who are still learning how to find their own peace. This is where the heart finally rests without needing constant proof that it is safe. A place where love and calm can exist together without contradiction. A place where your serenity is no longer negotiable, but simply who you have become. As peace becomes your new foundation, you begin to notice another change unfolding quietly in the background. The same calm that protected you from chaos also starts separating you from places that once felt like home. Conversations feel different. Environments feel unfamiliar. Even laughter shared with certain people carries a distance you cannot explain. Growth has shifted your inner world, and now the outer world no longer fits in the same way. This is where a deeper challenge appears. Not conflict, not insecurity, but loneliness. A quiet, persistent loneliness that comes from realizing you can no longer return to the version of life that once felt comfortable. Tonight, we move into the loneliness of choosing growth over familiarity. There is a particular ache that comes from outgrowing spaces that once held your entire story. These are not toxic places you can easily walk away from with relief. They are filled with memories, shared jokes, old routines, and people who knew you before you changed. Leaving them feels like leaving a piece of yourself behind. Familiarity has a powerful pull because it offers certainty. Even when it is imperfect, it is predictable. You know how conversations will unfold. You know what role you play. You know what is expected of you. Growth disrupts that certainty. It removes the script you were following and replaces it with blank space. Blank space can feel terrifying. Without familiar surroundings, you are forced to meet yourself without distractions. You notice thoughts you used to avoid. You feel emotions you once drowned in noise. You question decisions more deeply. Growth strips away layers of identity until only what is authentic remains. This process often happens quietly. There is no dramatic announcement. One day you simply realize that certain places drain you instead of energizing you. You notice that conversations centered around gossip, complaint, or superficial topics feel exhausting. You realize that you crave depth, honesty, and calm in ways you never did before. The people around you may not understand this shift. From their perspective, nothing changed. The routines are the same. The environment is the same. They expect you to behave as you always have. When you don't, confusion arises. They may say you are distant. They may say you have become too serious. They may say you think you are better than them. These reactions are not always malicious. They reflect discomfort with change that they did not choose. Your growth challenges their stability because it disrupts the shared identity that once connected you. Buddhist teachings emphasize that attachment to identity creates suffering. When people bond over shared history, that history becomes part of how they define themselves. If one person evolves, the others may feel as though their own identity is being questioned. Choosing growth does not mean rejecting those people. It means acknowledging that the version of you that once fit there no longer exists. This realization creates grief. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but a slow grief that comes from watching something fade while still being present. You attend gatherings but feel slightly out of place. You listen to conversations but struggle to contribute. You smile, yet inside there is a sense of distance that cannot be bridged by effort alone. Loneliness here is not about physical isolation. It is about emotional misalignment. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone because they no longer meet you where you are internally. Buddhism teaches that loneliness can become a teacher rather than an enemy. It forces you to develop a relationship with yourself that is not dependent on external validation. It invites you to discover what truly nourishes your spirit instead of what merely fills time. However, this invitation often arrives wrapped in discomfort. When you step away from familiarity, you also step away from the safety of being understood automatically. New environments require explanation. New relationships require vulnerability. You must reveal parts of yourself that were hidden before. This exposure can feel exhausting, especially when you are still learning who you are becoming. Growth demands patience with uncertainty. You may wonder if the loneliness is temporary or permanent. You may question whether you made the right choice. You may miss the ease of belonging, even if that belonging was based on a version of you that no longer felt authentic. This is where many people are tempted to return to old patterns. Not because they truly want to, but because the loneliness feels heavier than the discomfort of staying the same. Familiar pain can feel easier than unfamiliar emptiness. But returning to familiarity after growth often creates a deeper dissatisfaction. You see things you cannot unsee. You feel misalignment more intensely. You become aware of how much energy it takes to pretend. Buddhist mindfulness encourages staying present with discomfort instead of escaping it. The loneliness of growth is not punishment. It is a transition period, a space between who you were and who you are becoming. In this space, you learn independence in a new way, not independence from people, but independence from needing constant reassurance. You discover that your worth does not depend on how well you fit into a group. You learn to enjoy solitude without interpreting it as failure. Solitude becomes fertile ground for self-discovery. You explore interests that were neglected. You create routines that reflect your current values. You spend time in silence, allowing your mind to settle. You reconnect with your body through movement, breath, or stillness. These practices rebuild your sense of home internally rather than externally. Another layer of loneliness comes from realizing that growth changes priorities. Activities that once excited you may now feel shallow. Late-night conversations that revolved around drama may feel draining. You start seeking environments that support calm, creativity, or meaningful connection. Finding these environments takes time. In the meantime, there is a gap. During this gap, it may feel as though you belong nowhere. Old spaces no longer fit, and new ones have not fully appeared. This can create a sense of floating, as if you are suspended between identities. Buddhism describes this as a state of becoming. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Just as a caterpillar must dissolve before becoming a butterfly, the old self must soften before the new one stabilizes. Loneliness also reveals how much we rely on shared history to feel secure. Shared memories create continuity. They remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves. When you step away from those memories as the primary source of identity, you must build a new narrative. This narrative is based on intention rather than accident. You choose who you spend time with. You choose what conversations you engage in. You choose what experiences shape your life moving forward. This level of choice can feel overwhelming at first because it comes with responsibility. You can no longer blame circumstances for how your life feels. You are actively shaping it. But with responsibility comes empowerment. You begin to trust your ability to create connections that reflect your true self. You meet people who resonate with your current values. You experience conversations that feel nourishing instead of obligatory. You form bonds that are based on who you are now rather than who you used to be. These new connections often grow slowly because they are built on authenticity rather than proximity. They require patience, openness, and willingness to be seen without masks. Buddhist compassion also plays a role here. It reminds you that the people you outgrew are not enemies. They are simply on a different path. You can appreciate what they meant to your past without forcing them into your future. Releasing resentment makes space for gratitude. You can be thankful for the laughter, the support, the lessons, even the mistakes. Each contributed to your development. Without those experiences, the growth you now embody would not exist. Loneliness gradually transforms into quiet confidence. You become comfortable walking alone because you trust that alignment will attract companionship in time. You stop rushing to fill silence with noise. You stop fearing weekends without plans. You stop measuring your worth by social activity. Peace replaces urgency. This peace allows you to approach new relationships from a place of wholeness rather than need. You are not searching for someone to complete you. You are open to sharing life with those who enhance your journey. Growth over familiarity also teaches boundaries. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to protect your energy. You learn to decline invitations that feel misaligned. This can initially increase loneliness, but it also preserves your well-being. Over time, boundaries create space for healthier connections to emerge. Another subtle shift occurs in how you experience memories. Instead of longing to return to the past, you begin to see it as a completed chapter. You smile at old stories without wishing to relive them. You accept that those moments were meant for who you were then, not who you are now. This acceptance brings closure without needing dramatic endings. The loneliness of growth is not permanent. It is transitional. It prepares you for a life where belonging is based on authenticity rather than convenience. It teaches resilience, patience, and self-compassion. Buddhist teachings emphasize that everything arises and passes away, including loneliness. When you stop resisting it, it begins to soften. When you treat it as an enemy, it intensifies. Sitting with loneliness allows it to reveal its message. The message is simple but profound. You are ready for a different life, a life where you are not defined by history alone, a life where relationships are chosen consciously, a life where peace matters more than familiarity. Eventually, you realize that growth did not isolate you. It redirected you. It moved you toward environments where your authenticity can thrive. It cleared space for connections that honor your evolution. In that realization, the loneliness loses its sharp edge. It becomes a memory of a passage you crossed, not a place where you remain. You look back and see how necessary it was. Without it, you would have stayed where comfort replaced truth. You would have silenced your intuition to maintain belonging. You would have delayed the life that was waiting for you. Choosing growth over familiarity is one of the bravest decisions a person can make. It requires trusting an invisible future more than a visible past. It requires believing that alignment will eventually replace emptiness. And when it does, you understand something deeply reassuring. You did not lose your place in the world. You simply found a truer one, a place where you no longer have to shrink to fit, a place where your calm is welcomed, a place where shared history is not the only reason people stay. This is the quiet reward for enduring the loneliness of growth. A life that reflects who you have become, not who you were afraid to leave behind. As the loneliness of growth slowly softens, another emotion often rises from beneath it. It is quieter, more personal, and sometimes harder to face than loneliness itself. You begin to realize that the hardest person to make peace with is not the one you left behind, but the version of yourself who stayed for so long. You look back at the roles you once played, the promises you once believed in, the identity that once felt permanent, and a question surfaces that carries both sadness and relief. What if you simply want a different life now? This question can feel heavy because it challenges the idea that consistency equals virtue. It touches the guilt of changing, the shame of no longer fitting into expectations that once felt sacred. Tonight, we move into the delicate process of forgiving yourself for wanting a different life. There is a particular weight carried by people who were once defined by loyalty, responsibility, or sacrifice. These roles often become part of identity so deeply that stepping away from them feels like betrayal. You may have been the one who held everything together, the one who stayed when things were difficult, the one who prioritized others' needs over your own. Over time, that role became a source of pride, but also a quiet prison. When growth invites you to step outside that role, shame can appear immediately. It whispers that you are abandoning your values. It tells you that wanting more is selfish. It reminds you of the people who depended on you and asks how you can possibly choose a different path now. Buddhist teachings describe this inner conflict as attachment to identity. When you cling to a fixed idea of who you are supposed to be, any change feels like moral failure. But identity is not meant to be permanent. It is meant to evolve as awareness deepens. Wanting a different life does not erase the sincerity of the life you lived before. It simply means that your understanding has expanded. Forgiveness begins with acknowledging that you made choices based on the awareness you had at the time. You did what you believed was right. You fulfilled roles that felt meaningful. You stayed in places that once aligned with your values. Judging your past self with your present clarity creates unnecessary suffering. Compassion toward yourself requires recognizing that growth changes perspective. What once felt sacred may now feel restrictive. What once felt necessary may now feel optional. What once felt fulfilling may now feel incomplete. This does not invalidate the past. It reveals that you are no longer the same person. Another layer of shame comes from the fear of disappointing others. When people are accustomed to a certain version of you, your evolution disrupts their expectations. They may express confusion, hurt, or resistance. They may remind you of your commitments, your promises, or your history together. These reactions can trigger guilt because you care about their feelings. You do not want to be seen as unreliable or ungrateful. But Buddhism emphasizes that compassion includes compassion for yourself. Ignoring your inner truth to maintain others' comfort leads to resentment and emotional exhaustion. Forgiving yourself means accepting that you cannot fulfill every expectation without losing authenticity. It also means understanding that people's disappointment does not automatically mean you did something wrong. Sometimes disappointment is simply the natural response to change. There is also grief involved in releasing roles that once gave your life structure. Even if those roles limited you, they provided purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging. Without them, you may feel uncertain about who you are. This uncertainty can feel like emptiness, but it is actually space for new possibilities. Buddhist philosophy views emptiness not as lack, but as openness. It is the condition that allows new forms to arise. When you step out of an old identity, you enter a space where you can redefine yourself consciously rather than automatically. This redefinition requires patience. You may not immediately know what your new life looks like. You may feel disoriented, as if you are learning how to exist again. This is not failure, it is transition. Forgiving yourself also involves releasing the idea that consistency is the highest virtue. True integrity is not about remaining the same forever. It is about aligning your actions with your current understanding of truth. When truth changes, integrity requires adjustment. Holding on to outdated roles to appear consistent creates inner conflict. Letting go allows inner harmony. Another important aspect is recognizing that wanting a different life does not mean rejecting everything that came before. It means integrating those experiences into a broader perspective. You can honor the sacrifices you made without continuing to sacrifice. You can appreciate the lessons without repeating the patterns. Gratitude and release can coexist. Buddhism often speaks of the middle path, avoiding extremes of attachment and rejection. Forgiving yourself follows this principle. You neither cling to the past nor condemn it. You accept it as part of your journey. Shame also loses power when you understand that everyone evolves. The people who seem stable often have their own internal transformations that are less visible. Change is not an exception to the human experience. It is the core of it. The desire for a different life is not a sign of disloyalty. It is a sign that your awareness has expanded beyond the boundaries you once accepted. Forgiveness requires honesty about what you truly want now. This can be uncomfortable because it removes the protective layer of excuses. You can no longer say you stayed because you had no choice. You acknowledge that you now have options, and with options comes responsibility. Responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also liberating. It means your future is not predetermined by past decisions. You can create a life that reflects your current values rather than your previous limitations. Another step in self-forgiveness is recognizing that you are allowed to prioritize your well-being. Many people were taught that selflessness is the highest moral standard. While caring for others is important, ignoring your own needs creates imbalance. Sustainable compassion includes caring for yourself so that you can care for others without resentment. Choosing a different life can actually increase your capacity to love because you are no longer depleted. Buddhist compassion extends to all beings, including yourself. Treating yourself with the same kindness you offer others dissolves shame gradually. Instead of criticizing your desire for change, you approach it with curiosity. What does this new desire reveal about your needs? What aspects of your life feel incomplete? What experiences are calling for your attention? These questions transform guilt into insight. Another powerful realization is that staying in a role that no longer fits prevents others from growing too. If you continue playing the caretaker, the rescuer, the mediator, or the peacemaker, others may rely on you instead of developing their own strength. Your departure from that role creates space for them to evolve. This perspective reframes your choice as an act of trust rather than abandonment. You trust that they can navigate life without the version of you they depended on. Forgiving yourself also means letting go of the fantasy that there is a perfect way to change without hurting anyone. Any transformation disrupts something. Trying to avoid all discomfort only prolongs misalignment. Growth requires accepting that some pain is inevitable, but unnecessary suffering can be avoided by acting with honesty and kindness. There is also freedom in realizing that you do not need universal approval. Approval is comforting, but it is not a reliable guide for authentic living. People's opinions are shaped by their own fears, expectations, and experiences. Seeking approval can lead you back into roles that suffocate your growth. Self-approval becomes more important than external validation. Meditation practices in Buddhism often involve observing thoughts without attaching to them. When shame arises, you can observe it as a passing state rather than a permanent truth. You notice the sensation in the body, the stories in the mind, and you allow them to exist without feeding them. Over time, the intensity diminishes. Forgiveness also involves speaking to yourself in a different way. Instead of harsh inner criticism, you practice gentle acknowledgement. You remind yourself that change is part of being alive. You recognize your courage for facing discomfort rather than avoiding it. Kindness toward yourself creates emotional safety. From that safety, new confidence grows. Eventually, you begin to feel gratitude for the person you were. That version of you carried you through circumstances that required resilience. They did not know what you know now, but they did the best they could. Thanking your past self, instead of judging them, completes the cycle of forgiveness. You move forward without dragging guilt behind you. As this process unfolds, you start experiencing life with more authenticity. Decisions feel aligned instead of forced. Relationships become more balanced because they are based on who you are now. Your energy is no longer divided between maintaining appearances and honoring truth. The desire for a different life transforms from a source of shame into a source of direction. You understand that growth did not erase your values, it refined them. You see that change did not destroy your identity. It revealed its deeper layers. You realize that the roles you left behind were not mistakes. They were stages of development. And most importantly, you learn that forgiving yourself is not a single moment. It is a continuous practice of choosing compassion over judgment each time doubt appears. With time, the heaviness lifts. The question, "What will others think?" becomes less important than what feels true to my heart. The fear of being misunderstood becomes less powerful than the relief of living honestly. This is where peace deepens. Not the peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the peace that comes from alignment between your inner life and your outer actions. In this alignment, the past stops feeling like something you escaped and starts feeling like something that prepared you to recognize misalignment sooner, prepared you to choose authenticity over approval, prepared you to forgive yourself for being human. Forgiving yourself for wanting a different life is ultimately an act of self-respect. It acknowledges that your needs matter, your growth matters, and your happiness is not a betrayal of anyone else. It is a quiet declaration that your life belongs to you. And in that declaration, the shame dissolves, replaced by a calm certainty that you are exactly where you need to be. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are finally listening to your own truth. From that place, the future no longer feels like an escape from the past. It feels like an invitation to become fully yourself, without apology, without guilt, and without the weight of roles that no longer fit the person you have become. As self-forgiveness settles into your heart, a quiet clarity begins to form. You stop blaming yourself for changing. You stop apologizing for needing a life that feels true. But with that clarity comes another realization that feels just as heavy as the guilt you released. Growth does not only change how you see yourself, it changes how you see the relationships that can no longer continue in the same way. You begin to understand that some endings are not failures, not betrayals, not acts of cruelty. They are acts of honesty. And honesty, when guided by compassion, can become a form of love rather than destruction. There is a way to leave without erasing what was beautiful. There is a way to walk away without turning the past into something bitter. Tonight, we move into the compassionate exit, the quiet art of honoring a relationship even as you release it. A goodbye does not always happen in anger. Sometimes it happens in silence, in understanding, in the painful recognition that love alone cannot sustain alignment. This kind of ending is not dramatic, but it leaves a deep imprint because it requires courage without hostility. The compassionate exit begins with acceptance. Acceptance that the relationship had meaning, acceptance that it shaped you, acceptance that it carried both joy and struggle. When you accept this fully, you no longer feel the need to rewrite history to justify your departure. People often feel pressured to turn a former partner into a villain in order to make leaving easier. This protects the ego, but it distorts the truth. When you demonize someone who once mattered deeply, you deny the sincerity of the connection that existed. Compassion allows you to hold a more nuanced truth. Someone can be good and still not be right for your future. A relationship can be real and still not be permanent. Love can exist alongside incompatibility. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging to permanence creates suffering. Relationships are living experiences, not fixed contracts. When they transform or end, it does not mean they were meaningless. It means they fulfilled the role they were meant to play. A compassionate exit honors that role. It recognizes the lessons learned, the growth experienced, the moments shared. Instead of erasing memories, it places them gently in the past where they can exist without controlling the present. Another aspect of leaving with compassion is honesty without cruelty. When you communicate your decision, the intention is not to assign blame or prove a point. It is to speak truthfully while preserving dignity, both yours and theirs. This requires choosing words carefully. Not words that sugarcoat reality, but words that avoid unnecessary harm. You acknowledge your feelings without attacking theirs. You express your needs without accusing them of failing. For example, saying, "I feel that we are growing in different directions," communicates truth without judgment. It focuses on alignment rather than fault. This approach may not remove all pain, but it prevents additional wounds caused by harshness. Compassion also involves timing. Ending a relationship in moments of anger often leads to words that cannot be taken back. Waiting until emotions settle allows you to speak from clarity instead of reaction. Calm communication creates space for understanding, even if agreement is not possible. Another important element is listening. A compassionate exit is not a monologue. It allows the other person to express their feelings, confusion, or grief. Listening does not mean changing your decision. It means acknowledging their experience as valid. This validation can reduce the sense of abandonment they might feel. It shows that their emotions matter, even as the relationship changes form. Buddhist compassion emphasizes seeing the suffering of others without becoming entangled in it. You recognize their pain without taking responsibility for fixing it. You remain present without sacrificing your own truth. Guilt often arises during compassionate endings because you care about the impact of your choice. You may question whether you are causing unnecessary hurt, but avoiding hurt entirely is impossible. The goal is not to eliminate pain, but to minimize harm. Harm is increased by deception, avoidance, or sudden disappearance. Harm is reduced by honesty, kindness, and presence. There is also compassion in acknowledging your own needs openly. Pretending that everything is fine prolongs confusion. It keeps both people in limbo. Clarity, even when painful, allows healing to begin sooner. A compassionate exit respects the other person's right to move forward. It does not keep them attached to false hope. It does not maintain emotional dependency out of fear. It offers closure by being transparent. Another dimension involves releasing the need to stay connected in the same way. Some relationships can transition into friendship. Others require distance to heal. Compassion means recognizing what is healthiest for both people rather than clinging to familiarity. Distance is not punishment, it is space for recovery. Without space, unresolved feelings can keep reopening wounds. Buddhist detachment does not mean indifference. It means caring without clinging. You wish the other person well without needing to remain part of their daily life. You allow them to find happiness in paths that no longer intersect with yours. This perspective transforms separation from loss into redirection. There is also compassion in how you remember the relationship afterward. Speaking respectfully about someone you once loved honors the shared history. It prevents bitterness from overshadowing gratitude. You do not need to pretend everything was perfect. You simply choose not to reduce the relationship to its ending. Memories become teachers rather than sources of regret. Forgiveness often plays a role in compassionate exits. You forgive them for the ways they hurt you, knowingly or unknowingly. You forgive yourself for staying longer than you should have or leaving sooner than they wanted. Forgiveness releases emotional residue that would otherwise follow you into future relationships. Without forgiveness, endings remain unfinished. With forgiveness, they become completed chapters. Another challenge is resisting the urge to rush into distraction. Ending a meaningful relationship creates emotional space that can feel uncomfortable. Filling that space immediately with noise, new attachments, or avoidance delays healing. Compassion toward yourself means allowing time to process the transition. You sit with the quiet, even when it feels heavy. You let emotions move through you without suppressing them. Healing becomes intentional rather than accidental. Buddhist mindfulness practices can support this process by grounding you in the present moment. Instead of replaying past conversations or worrying about the future, you focus on what is happening now, your breath, your body, your immediate surroundings. This presence reduces the intensity of regret and anxiety. Gradually, peace returns. Another aspect of compassionate exits is recognizing that both people contributed to the relationship's existence. Even if one person initiated the ending, the connection was co-created. This awareness prevents the narrative of one-sided blame. Relationships are complex interactions of personalities, circumstances, timing, and growth. Simplifying them into heroes and villains does not reflect reality. Compassion embraces complexity. It allows you to hold multiple truths simultaneously: that love existed, that pain existed, that growth occurred, and that separation became necessary. There is also humility in accepting that you may never fully understand the impact of the relationship on the other person. They have their own internal world, shaped by experiences you cannot see. Trusting that they will find their own healing path is part of letting go. You release control over how they interpret the ending. You focus on maintaining integrity in your own actions. Integrity becomes the foundation of peace. Over time, you may feel gratitude for the relationship's role in your development. You see how it shaped your values, revealed your needs, and clarified what alignment means to you. Even painful experiences contributed to self-awareness. This gratitude does not romanticize the past. It simply acknowledges its influence. A compassionate exit also prepares you for future connections. By leaving with kindness, you avoid carrying unresolved resentment into new relationships. You remain open rather than guarded. Your heart stays soft instead of hardened. Softness is not weakness. It is the ability to feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings. Buddhism teaches that compassion begins with recognizing shared humanity. Both you and the person you left are navigating life with imperfect understanding. Both of you are seeking happiness in your own ways. Both of you are learning through experience. Seeing this common ground reduces hostility. It allows you to wish them peace genuinely, not as a polite gesture, but as a sincere intention. Eventually, the intensity of the ending fades. The relationship becomes a memory integrated into your life story. You no longer replay the goodbye in your mind. You no longer question whether you did the right thing. You trust the decision that once felt uncertain. Trust replaces doubt. You move forward carrying lessons instead of wounds. The compassionate exit reveals a profound truth. Endings can be expressions of love. Not the love that holds on, but the love that releases when holding on would cause harm. It is love guided by wisdom rather than fear. Love that values truth over comfort. Love that understands that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both people is to allow the relationship to transform into memory. In this understanding, goodbye becomes less about loss and more about honoring what was real. You carry the warmth of the connection without needing its continuation. You respect the past without being bound to it. And as you step into the next chapter of your life, you do so with a heart that has learned how to close doors gently instead of slamming them shut. A heart that knows endings do not erase meaning. A heart that understands that leaving with compassion is not weakness, but one of the strongest acts of love a person can offer, to themselves and to someone who once shared their world. Loving someone and still outgrowing them is one of the quiet truths of being human. Not every ending is a failure. Not every distance is a loss. Sometimes love completes its work by changing you, by opening your eyes, by guiding you toward a version of yourself that could not exist if you had stayed the same. You learned that love can exist without possession, that compassion can replace clinging, that growth can feel painful but still be necessary. You saw how attachment to memories, expectations, and shared identities can keep the heart trapped in a story that has already ended. And slowly, you discovered that letting go is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of wisdom. Some people arrive to walk beside you forever. Others arrive to awaken you, then step away so you can continue the journey alone. Both kinds of love are real. Both deserve gratitude. And both shape the person you are becoming. If this message reached a part of you that is still healing, write in the comments, "I release with love." Not for anyone else, but as a promise to yourself that you are ready to move forward without bitterness, without guilt, and without losing your capacity to care. If you want more reflections like this, calm, honest, and grounded in wisdom that helps you navigate life and relationships, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There is a whole journey ahead, and you do not have to walk it alone. Take a deep breath, be gentle with your heart, and remember, outgrowing someone does not mean you stopped loving them. It means you are finally learning how to love without losing yourself. Until next time.